Yo, what's going on, people? Welcome to Evolutionary Client Acquisition. Now, I know this module's already deep and you're probably wondering, what is Dylan getting up to now? Like, what are all these weird, crazy names? What are all these things that he's doing and teaching us? Well, today's video, I'm going to teach you biology, evolution, genetics, and principles that we can extend from the disciplines on the study of biology and how they apply to acquisition. I know it sounds strange, it's very idiosyncratic and weird, but this video is going to completely blow your socks off. It's going to blow your mind, and there's a lot of effort and thought that's gone into this one. And so, like, when I was making this, I was like, right, I realized that there was these things that, like, I was like, right, why am I so good at client acquisition? And I've done this with other modules as well, but I'm like, right, why am I so good at client acquisition? That's not to toot my own home, but I've obviously done pretty well. So I'm like, right, what makes me good? And it's because I know systems, firstly, which we've covered. I know psychology, which we've covered. And I'm like, the only thing we haven't really covered is biology, and so that's what we're covering here, because that's also where I'm good at, and that's also I've applied it to acquisition. Because if you don't understand biology, then you don't really understand client acquisition, right? So, like, if anyone's ever telling you about, oh, I'm going to teach you client acquisition, they don't understand these things, then don't listen to them, right? I got a lot of this stuff from Sam Evans, a mentor of mine, and just over my learnings from my own experience and from other mentors I've had as well. Like, this is all stuff that is just all my combined knowledge from everything I've learned from Charles Darwin. This is heavily based on Charles Darwin as well. Like, all of this stuff combined to client acquisition for OnlyFans agencies, right? It's like everything I've grabbed from client acquisition, right? I spent tons of time getting these fancy graphs from Google to explain common descent, right? So now, again, I know you're probably looking at the timestamp and you're like, fuck me, like, I just want the shiny objects, I just want the SOPs, like, just don't skip this video, right? Because if you skip this video and don't watch it, then you're going to have a huge blind spot in your paradigm when it comes to acquisition. So please pay attention. Don't listen to it on fucking 2x when you're cooking or wherever. Because if you actually watch this video and apply this video, your life will generally get a lot easier and you'll make better decisions when it comes to acquisition, right? And I promise you that. Like, if you pay attention and act on it and implement it and watch it again and again and again, your life will change. So that's why this video is worth your time. Now, I wouldn't put this in the program if it didn't matter, and this module is like it's insane, right? So the first thing we've got here is common descent. Now, common descent is a concept in evolutionary biology, and it states that all species of organism originated from a common ancestor. Basically, all living things from wet redwood trees, ants, and that weird neighbor you have all descended from a common ancestor, and it looks something like this, right? So common descent is a very simple idea, and it states that every single living thing, every organism, every species, we all came from the same source, and it's through genetic mutation and something called descent of modification, whereby the original source has offspring, and then the offspring is slightly different to the original source, and over thousands or tens of thousands or millions of generations, you end up with loads of different random variations of which have completely different properties and are completely unrecognizable from each other, right? And so it kind of looks like this over here, right? It's like this tree starts at the bottom, and then you get bacteria coming out here, and then more bacteria, different types of bacteria here, and then you go this way, and then you get like different types of trees, and then you go this way, and you get like sharks and like dogs and humans, and like that's basically how it works, right? And so you got like ancestors to present day species, right? And this is what we're about to cover now. So descent with modification. Now, descent with modification means parents have children, but the children will be slightly different from their parents. Every generation of offspring is slightly different from its descendants. With thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of generations, one species can give rise to a new species sharing a common ancestor. For example, we've got like the pantheras here, like this, like all these different types of tigers evolved from this one thing. Same with elephants, right? Like if we look at the elephant example, this thing over here, this African elephant that we got today came from this like warthog looking thing here. It's obviously not a warthog, but it came from this thing. And so like these evolved over time. And so you got all these different sort of species just began stemming off this thing here, and then, you know, like maybe like 5 million years ago we had this mammoth, right, or wherever. And so like over time we eventually got the African elephant, and that all works with descent and modification, right? Does that make sense? And so it's the same thing with common descent, where you start with an original species, and then over time and generations, like every time a parent has offspring, the offspring is slightly different and has different traits, and just through this swath of time, essentially, that everything is born. And so now I know you're, again, at this point, like, Dylan, what the fuck are you talking about? I need more clients. Like, why are you talking about African elephants? Like, yeah, I know, just stick with me. It's all going to make sense, right? So next we've got natural selection, right? So natural selection is a theory proposed by Charles Darwin. It explains how all living organisms have evolved over generations and with time. It's a very simple idea. Organisms with traits that are better adapted to the conditions of their environment are more likely to survive and produce more offspring, producing offspring with the same heritable characteristics that enable them to survive. So we've got an organism, which is a living thing, offspring, which is an organism's child, traits, which is distinctive characteristics or qualities that living things have, right? So, you know, for example, if you've got blue eyes, then that's a trait. Or if a crow's got black feathers, then that's a trait. Then we've got heritable, right, which is a trait that an organism passes on to its offspring genetically. Then we've got environment, which is surroundings and conditions an organism exists in, so predators, competitors, temperature, etc., right? So in a simple diagram, it looks like this. You've got the parents, and you've got the parents here and the offspring, right? Which are the descendants of the parents. And the parents pass on their inheritable traits to the offspring. But what you'll notice is that if you take two blue butterflies that are slightly different shades of blue, they'll produce more blue butterflies with slight different shades of blue to them. And then the same with the red butterflies. If you take two different slightly shades of red, they're going to produce more slightly different shades of red from them, right? So they're not going to be the same, they're all going to be slightly different shades. And that's because offspring vary in their heritable traits. And so you can see here a nice little diagram, the butterflies talking to each other like, hey, are you red? That's pretty sweet. Whoa, love the blue wing color, right? So when organisms reproduce, it's typical that more offspring are produced than can survive, because organisms are capable of producing more offspring than their environment can support. For example, some turtles lay up to 200 eggs. So what that means is when an organism in an environment like a turtle, when it reproduces, it's really important to the carrying on of the species that it produces more offspring than the environment can actually support. Because what that does is it gives the species and the offspring a stronger chance for success. A stronger chance for them to grow up and have more offspring, because if a turtle only lays one egg, then there's only one chance that that baby survives, which is not good for the overall survival of the species. And that's because organisms produce more offspring than the environment can support. And so there is always competition for survival in the form of food, resources, and mates. So we can see here that it's kind of like the law of nature that the environment only has limited resources. And so it's not an infinite pool of resources, and the main things that the environment constitutes as a resource is food, habitats, and mates. And not all individuals will survive and reproduce, right? So offspring with traits better adapted to the environment are able to outcompete offspring with less desirable traits, thus securing food, resources, and mates. Meaning offspring with more adapted traits can reproduce and make more offspring. So desirable traits, right? So desirable basically means, does this trait secure the chances of securing one of these three things, right? Like lack of food, lack of habitat, lack of mates. If so, then it's more adapted to survival, and therefore it's going to pass on those genes, right? And so like if the habitat of these butterflies is like, let's just say the habitat, the environment is like a blue plant, right? And these butterflies are nesting on these plants, then which butterflies do you think are more likely to survive? Like which trait is more likely to be conducive to survival? Being blue and blending in, or the red ones who stick out like a sore thumb just waiting for a bird to come and sweep them up and eat them, right? So what that means is over time in the population, the blue trait would be selected for, and you'd eventually only have blue butterflies. So then if the environment, for example, or the flowers later on turn red, then over time, the species would either go extinct or evolve into a different direction, right? So if we look at this example of the birds and mice, right? A population of mice has moved into a new area where the rocks are very dark due to natural genetic variation. Some mice are black while others are tan. So it's really important to the survival of a species that variation is present, because you've got to realize that nature doesn't really care about organisms on an individual level. It cares about species as a whole. And I mean, it doesn't really care. That's not a sentiment that nature can really afford to give anyone. But what I'm trying to say here is when you watch a nature documentary and you see an eagle eating a mouse, you should never pity the mouse, because there's probably loads of other mice surviving and thriving. So it's the overall species that really matters. And so obviously what's going to happen is these mice here on the black rocks, right? like when a bird comes, well, the ones who are not blending in, they're going to be eaten, right? And so some mice are eaten by birds, and tan mice are more visible to predatory birds than black mice. Thus, tan mice are eaten at a higher frequency than black mice. Only the surviving mice reach reproductive age and leave offspring. Mice reproduce, given next generation. So in the next generation, you can see there's obviously less tanned mice, because black mice had a higher chance of leaving offspring than tan mice. The next generation contains a higher fraction of black mice than the previous generation. So this is how a species evolves, right? The environment sets the conditions for survival, and if you can't meet those conditions, then you're going to die, and people that can are going to reproduce, and when they reproduce, they pass on traits that help them survive, and that's how generations adapt, right? And that's also how we got elephants, right? That's also how we got elephants from wherever the hell this thing was millions of years ago to the current African elephant we've got today, right? So next we've got fitness, right? Now fitness is a really important term to understand, because we're going to be talking about this a lot throughout the rest of the video. But fitness is a term used to describe whether or not an organism can survive and reproduce. An organism with high fitness has a better chance of surviving and passing on its genes to its offspring. And so an organism's fitness is determined by how well adapted it is to its environment, and how well adapted it is determined by its traits, right? So I'm not talking about fitness in the sense of like, oh, which lion has bigger biceps and quads and goes to the gym more often. Fitness in evolutionary biology terms just means what are your chances of survival, my guy, right? And so if you've got a high level of fitness, then you're going to survive. But the only way to have high levels of fitness is by having traits adapted to the environment, right? Traits, blue or red butterfly, right? So all organisms have traits. A trait is a characteristic, quality, or attribute an organism has that distinguishes it from its other organisms in the same environment. For example, Darwin's finches. This is pretty famous, everyone probably knows this. In the 1800s, Charles Darwin took a trip to the Galapagos Islands, right? And he found that different species of finch existed on different islands. And depending on the food source of the islands, the dominant species of finch would have a beak adapted to the consumption of that particular food source. Finches with the long and sharp beaks were found on the islands where the primary food source was insects. Shorter, blunt beaks were found on the islands where the primary food sources were seeds and nuts. Beak shape and size is a trait that determines fitness. So if you're a finch on an island and you have got a short, stubby beak, right? And the only food on that island is insects, then you've not got an adapted trait, because you can't really eat insects with a short, stubby beak because they hide places, right? Because if you've got this nice, long, sharp beak, then you can get into the nooks and crannies to actually eat these insects, right? Which you can't do with a short and stubby beak. So you can see how a trait determines fitness. So if you don't have a trait that's adapted to the environment for survival, then you do not have fitness and you're gonna die. And that gene is not gonna be passed on, right? So next we have got DNA and genotypes, right? Now DNA is the carrier of genetic information. It's self-replicating and contains all the information needed on a genetic level to create an organism. A genotype is the complete set of genetic material, DNA, an organism has. An organism's traits are determined by its genotype. For example, different finches have different beak shapes. This is because they have different genotypes that code for different beak structures. Or different people have different eye colors, and this is because they have different genotypes that code for different eye color. Simple, right? So DNA is basically genetic code. So if you've got a genetic code for blue eyes, then you'll have blue eyes. And when you reproduce as humans, right, like when we reproduce as humans, I should say, we create a zygote and embryo, and over time, that embryo will have the genetic material of the parents with the genetic code of blue eyes, and that's the genotype, right? So, what determines an organism's genotype? Well, variation. So variation is the environment sets the conditions for which traits produce fitness, and therefore which heritable genotypes produce fitness. Organisms with fitness are more likely to reproduce and pass on their genotypes to offspring. When an organism produces offspring, its offspring will slightly vary in genotype and therefore in traits. This is because of descent with modification. Now, the key word here is vary. Variation is the key to natural selection, and for a species to be successful and survive for a long period of time, variation must be present. Species without variation are more susceptible to extinction, which is obviously not good. Variation is produced by random mutation, whereby the genotype of an organism randomly mutates during the mating and embryonic development process. It's basically through random mutation, which is basically genetic iteration and common descent, that any species is created, right? So the way nature works is that it sees genes as like variables, and it will randomly shuffle genes, and it will put a species in an environment, and it will reproduce offspring with random different traits that are slightly different to its parents, and it's just testing things, right? Nature is just one massive mad scientist, and it's taking these genotypes and it's like, ooh, what happens if I increase the length of the beak on this finch by 2 inches? And then it's like, ooh, now you can get those bugs, and now you have a higher fitness, and now you're more conducive to survival, so now you're more likely to reproduce because you can eat food because of your new beak. And then it's like, okay, well, let's just produce more birds with that beak. So nature is just a supply chain producer of species and organisms, but the way it produces its organisms and product is just through random iteration and mutation of the genetic code of its products, if you will. And that is how everything has been created, just through random mutation of genotypes, and nature just basically just testing everything. And the reason why human beings are the most successful species on the planet, and the reason why we've done so well, is purely through iteration and random mutation. And it's kind of humbling, right? Because us as a human, like the difference between, it's humbling to be like, us as a human, the difference between us and like a bird or an orange is literally just random mutation over time. So lucky for us, our environment set the conditions for humans to be the most successful species. Nature just had to take enough time, and which happened to be, many millions of years, and over those millions of years, nature is optimized for humans, and that's how this works, right? And so the premise of this, right? The premise of this is, in your niche, in your market, that's the environment, right? And then your niche and the market that you're in sets the conditions and the situations for the survival of your business. And if you give your business enough time and enough iteration, and it doesn't have to be random, because you should be able to make more estimated guesses than nature, then if you make enough iterations to your business and your model and your systems over a long enough time horizon, then you can basically become perfectly attuned to your market. And the more adapted your business is to the market, the more adapted it is to the environment it finds itself in, which is the market, the more you survive, right? The more fitness your business has, which means the more it can grow, which pretty much means the more money you will produce as offspring, technically, right? Not really, but you know what I mean, right? So now we have fractals, right? So you'll have to understand that DNA is fractal. A fractal exists as patterns that are identical across scale. Once a species has fitness, nature will scale it as fractal, right? This is done by reproduction. This means exponential population growth until an equilibrium is hit where the environment cannot support further population growth. So you can see from this GIF view that I can pretty much kind of explain what fractal is, right? So basically we've got this black circle, and then if we zoom in, right, when it zooms in to this black circle, we see an identical black circle, an identical pattern. And then the same when we zoom into the next black circle, and it's just a never-ending, ongoing thing. And so DNA works on a fractal, whereby you can take an organism and another organism, and you could look at their DNA and you'd find similar patterns across scale, across different ends of the world. And that's how nature scales. It uses DNA, and DNAs are fractal, right? So this is how population growth over time works, right? And it's basically a graph that describes an invasive population species in this example, whereby there's an environment, and within that environment, everything is harmonious and working well, and suddenly along comes a species that is invasive. And invasive just means it's not in its natural native environment. But the new species has traits that are really well adapted for survival. And so if you put that thing in an environment, it's just going to multiply exponentially. And that's what happens here with invasive species, right? And so you pretty much want your business to be like an invasive species, right? And so it's kind of like the playbook that we're using now with this coaching business. Like when I started this, my agency was already pretty fucking successful, but I had no testimonials, I had no proof that I could replicate what I'd done with my agency for others. And so I looked at the market of all the competitors selling OFM programs and courses and mentorships, and I looked at the traits that the competition had, and I was like, well, all of their products are just dog shit. And so the trait that I needed to adapt for, to experience explosive growth over the long haul, right, over this time, is to have a good product. And so that's currently what's happening right now, right, is literally like up until this point, there's been this lag time. And in business, there is a lag time where you're just sort of getting started and it's not going to just like fly up immediately, because it takes time to get customers and it takes time to get your name out there. But then when that happens, what happens then is if you get past the lag time, right? If you get past this lag time, what happens is you then have traits that are now more adapted to the survival of the market. And so that means you then have fitness, right? And essentially, you experience this like exponential growth phase, and which is kind of like where I'm on the cusp on right now with my coaching business. And I did the exact same thing with my agency. And now the difference between nature and business is that nature has to cap out at an equilibrium because the environment cannot further support the growth of the invasive species. But in business, this probably works when you can't handle more clients or you feel like you don't want any more clients, right? So that's how invasive species or any species that does really well grows. It has this lag time, and then nature's like, oh, this is pretty cool, and then bang, it just flies up, right? Lag time flies up, right? And then it obviously peaks, and then you hit this equilibrium, right? And that's, for example, like I said, when you can't take on any more clients, or you don't want to take any more clients, right? So over many iterations, generations in evolutionary biology, successful species are created. So that's the base layer of understanding that we need to know to be able to apply this to client acquisition, right? So thanks for bearing with me. The evolutionary biology into the next lesson is over. And so in short, we can see that obviously scale is determined by reproduction, right? An organism's or species' ability to reproduce. And if it's able to reproduce a lot, then it's going to scale quickly. And if it can't, then it's not going to scale, right? And reproduction in business is basically how many clients can you sign and how many clients can you support. So scale is determined by reproduction. So here you can see how we've thought critically and done some like first principles thinking here, right? We want to scale our businesses, but to be able to do that, we need to be able to reproduce, which is sign more clients. And to do that, we need fitness, which basically means we can survive and that we have systems that have fitness. So like if your client acquisition systems have fitness, then that just means it's working. And it's only working if it's adapted, and it's only adapted if it has the right traits, and it only has the right traits, or it only has the right traits if it has the right genotype, and only has the right genotype if enough variation is being put through it, right? So again, in short, scale is determined by reproduction. Reproduction is determined by fitness. Fitness is determined by adaptability. Adaptability is determined by traits, aka characteristics. Traits are determined by genotypes, aka DNA. And genotypes are determined by variation, which is random mutation, right? So next, let's look at applied biology, right? So now we've established the key terms needed to understand genetics and evolutionary biology. Now I'm going to explain how these terms apply to client acquisition, and then I'll break them down individually. So we've got scale, which is when a system produces desired outputs and we increase the input volume of it, right? So you scale a client acquisition system when it's doing what you want it to, right? The Polaris stars in KPI, for example, and you just increase the input volume. So it's like, right, okay, I send 500 DMs and book 5 calls. So now I'm going to send 1,000 DMs and book 50 calls, right? This is scale. And so then we have got reproduction. Now, reproduction is when a stimulus works so well, we use it as a model to create new stimuli. Or you could look at it as when a system works so well, we use it as a model to create a new system. So if you come across a piece of DM copy, for example, and it works really, really well, and it's producing insane results, and essentially what you can do is reproduce that DM copy to have offspring, and you can look at that copy and be like, well, okay, if that's working really well, why don't I just duplicate it and make a couple of little changes to it, just like nature would with descent and modification, and then we have this like new variation, this new sort of offspring with different traits, and now let's see if this offspring is more likely to survive and have more fitness than the existing system, right? It's kind of like Petri dish experiments. Then we have fitness, which is when a stimulus is in KPI in a system. So fitness, again, we measure against metrics. So if a system's in KPI, for example, if your appointment booking rate or your sales to conversion rate or your off to close rate or your show up rate, if that's in KPI, then it has fitness. And if it's really far into KPI, then it has more fitness. Now, fitness isn't like this binary thing, right? It's not binary. So it's not like, do you have fitness or not? It's just like, how much fitness do you have? And so if a stimulus is in KPI, then it has fitness, right? Then we have got adaptability, which is when a stimulus is well adapted to the latent conditions of the market. But we're going to be talking more about stimuli use. So like, for example, ad copy, sales scripts, Calendly events. But if a stimulus is well adapted to the latent conditions to your niche or your market, then it has adaptability, right? And remember latent conditions, if you remember, we talked about this in all the other modules, I think. And these are the situational, circumstantial, or psychological needs, desires, and wants of your market. And if you can meet them, you'll do really well, as oftentimes the market doesn't even realize that these exist, right? So traits. The traits of a stimulus. So remember, stimulus just means like thumbnails, DM copy, ad creatives, YouTube organic videos, YouTube thumbnails, etc. So the traits of a stimulus is a long form, short form, soft pitch, is a hard pitch, is it funny, etc. Then we have got genotypes, which is the DNA of a stimulus, so the core variables that make it up. So this is where it will all make sense to you in a little bit when we talk about genotypes. But the DNA of a stimulus is basically the core variables that make it up. So just like organisms have DNA, and just like they have genotypes that code for traits and create adaptability, a stimulus has DNA, not on the same level obviously, but a stimulus has DNA and a genotype that creates traits, that creates adaptability, right? And then lastly, we got variation, which is random or calculated iterations or changes made to variables of a stimulus. So once we understand the genotype of a stimulus, we can start to create variants of that DNA and test that in the market to see if it has fitness or not. And this is like scientific method. It's kind of like a fail-safe. Like, you can't really lose with scientific method. I mean, it literally put a man on the moon. Like, it's like literally put a man on the moon. It's literally helped us find like all sorts of stuff and helped us pretty much understand the world as we know it. And so if a scientific method can do all of that stuff, then I'm pretty sure that you can figure out how to get some clients from it, right? So then we have got stimulus genotypes, DNA, right? So from previous videos, we know that client acquisition can be understood on multiple levels. Macro, which is the big picture of client acquisition, the overarching system of client acquisition. And then we have micro, which is the little pictures of client acquisition, so subsystems that make up the microsystem. And then we have stimuli, which is tangible assets we use to get humans to take action towards becoming a client. And we can observe DNA genotypes present at the stimulus level. DNA genotypes in acquisition are basically strings of variables making up a stimulus that, if combined, create results and produce outputs in KPI. Stimulus genotypes are combinations of variables that work in strings like DNA, like this: variable 1, variable 2, variable 3, variable 4, which is going to equal a stimulus. Now, there's a lot more variables, for example, that can go into this, but these are like the key main ones, right? Like, these are like, there's more variables than this, but these would be like the most important ones, as we can't iterate on 12 different things at once, right? So when creating a stimulus, you want to look at like, what are the 2, 3, 4 things that I must have for this to work? Like, what are the key variables, right? And so again, Macro, right, when we look at this, like the big picture, macro is just like human to client. Micro is like stranger to attention, to interest, to appointment, to show, right? You know, like the little steps. And then stimuli create the micro, and the micro create the macro, but the variable create the stimuli, right? So it's the variables create the stimuli, then the stimuli create the micro subsystems, and the micro subsystems create the macro subsystem, right? And we're going to get into this, and it's going to make sense in a bit now. So a variable is a component of a stimulus that can be changed. Variables are important to understand because they are the building blocks of a stimulus. So for example, in this case, stimulus would be DM outreach. So the variables that make up DM outreach could be a personalized video, an evergreen VSL, and a follow-up sequence, right? That would be like the variables for our DM alchemy system, which you guys are going to get access to, right? Then you could look at it with a sales pitch. You've got content, conviction, and offer. Like those are the main key variables that make up a sales pitch. And then you could look at a Facebook ad. So the stimulus is the Facebook ad. And then you've got the variables that make up the stimulus, which is the creative, the ad copy, the ad headline, and the audience. Obviously, again, there's more variables than this that make up a Facebook ad, but these are the key ones that push the needle forward, right? Like I said, we can't just go and iterate on 12 different variables. Then we've got a YouTube video. So the stimulus, that's the stimulus, right? The YouTube video. And then we've got the variables that make up that stimulus, which is the hook, the title, the content, the thumbnail, for example. Then we have got a stimulus for sales rebuttal. So, you know, you got empathy, you got argument, you got conviction, which makes up like a sales rebuttal. So like an objection handle. And so like the thing is, if you don't have these three key variables, then this doesn't work, right? Because if you just have argument, then you're just going to be arguing with a person when they give an objection, right? So you need them all these key variables to work and to be in KPI for this stimulus to be effective. And if the stimulus is effective, well, that feeds into the micro subsystem. And if the micro subsystems are effective across all micro subsystems, then the macro system is going to be effective, meaning the client acquisition system is going to work, right? And so next we've got the client acquisition shell. Now client acquisition works like a shell. So we got the macro, which is equals the shell containing micro subsystems. So the macro you, and then we've got the shell, which is these, right? So the shell containing then stimuli, and then a stimuli, which is equals the shell containing the variables, right? So we've got variables in blue, I've colored them, stimuli in purple, subsystems in green, and macro client acquisition system in yellow, right? So macro equals shell containing micro subsystems, subsystem equals shell containing stimuli, and stimuli equals shell containing variables, right? So the overarching system is simply made up of smaller systems that are made up of stimuli that are then made up of variables. So the thing is about client acquisition, it all comes down to these variables here, right? Without these, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, right? And so I'm gonna pull this doc up now on a nicer sheet so you can actually see it a bit more clear, and we're gonna explain this. So when people look at client acquisition, most people just look at this, the macro, right? The human to client. So all their efforts and decisions are made based on their paradigm of client acquisition is just this. But we now know that after some critical thinking and some Socratic reasoning that actually client acquisition exists on these micro levels, and we've got these 6 subsystems that are universal and must be followed for a stranger to become a client. But then we can observe, what we can observe here is below the micro level, right? Below the micro level, if we look, it's like, okay, well, what are the subsystems made up of? Well, we know it's inputs, processes, output, and feedback. But the main thing is always going to be the process, because the input is just the person going through and converting, right? So then we have these micro subsystems that are made out of stimuli, and we have the stimulus level here. So subsystem 1, for example, going from latent conditions to attention, we've got different stimuli, right? And to compare this whole thing to fishing, just to start, to make it easier to understand, I'm just gonna, like, you know, stick with me. I'm just gonna compare this whole thing to fishing, right? I just think it's gonna be like easy way to understand, and do that first, and then I'll get into it and explain it even further. So to compare it to fishing, picture that the fish in this example I'm about to use is an OnlyFans creator, right? So it sounds weird, I know, but it'll make sense. So just picture that the fish that we're trying to catch is an OnlyFans creator. So here in subsystem 1, right, we have got the baiting process, right? So we got the baiting process, which is, you know, where we bait the line. Then in subsystem 2, the stimuli here is the striking process, where we got the fish's attention with the bait, and now we strike, and now you're on the line. And then subsystem 3, we've got the reeling process. And the reeling process is where we've got the fish on the line and now we're reeling them in. Then we've got subsystem 4, which is once we've reeled them in and they're pretty much ours, we just need to net them. And sometimes you might lose a fish when you're trying to net it, depending on how skilled the fisherman is, for example. And then we've got subsystem 5, which is the weighing process. So, now we've caught the fish and now we're like, okay, is this fish big enough to eat? Is it going to make a good meal? Does it weigh enough? Or should I throw it back in the ocean, right? And then subsystem 6, we have got once we've weighed them up and decided to cook the fish, then we're going to serve it and eat it, right? So again, we're not like eating humans here, we're eating the fish. This is just this is an example. So, this is the same thing as like the eating process is the same as the closing process once we close a prospect, right? And so like it might sound weird, this sort of strange metaphor, but I want to make this as metaphorically applicable as humanly possible so that you can understand these like sort of weird, intangible, abstract concepts on more of a straightforward level. And so that's the stimulus level, right? You can pause the video here if you want, basically just to see what stimuli do. You need, like, just throughout these subsystems to see what stimuli do. You can pause the video here and just have a look, but I'm going to give you guys this graph anyway, so, it doesn't really matter. But these stimuli ultimately, feed into the micro, which ultimately makes the macro client acquisition system work, right? So this is the first thing that has to happen to get them from latent conditions to attention, right? So we start with a stimulus like a YouTube thumbnail, for example, to get their attention, right? And then we have a low commitment call to action, which is like getting them to click the thumbnail, right? And then we go to subsystem 2, and that is where we have to convert the attention we've now got to interest. And so in this scenario, this would be like them actually watching the actual YouTube video. And then the moderate commitment would be like you saying in the YouTube video, like click the link down below in my video description. I've got a free thing that you can sign up for or whatever, right? And then you go subsystem 3, which is interest to appointment booked. So, we have them as a lead now. So now we can cold call them, we can retarget them, we can outreach them, wherever, right? And you kind of sort of see how this works, right? So now where it gets cool is below this, like below this stimulus level, right? And so you can kind of see how this works, right? You got the baiting process, which is like the YouTube ad. Again, no need for me to like re-explain all this, but you can kind of see how this works, and it goes all through these things to eventually to where you're closing them, right? And all these align to different things. So, this is the sales agenda where you're asking questions. The cooking process is where you're pitching the prospect. This is where you're stating your price, and this is where you're actually handling objections and closing them, right? And so like this is how like acquisition works. It starts by them seeing a YouTube video or a cold DM, however you want it, which targets the latent conditions of the market. For example, I use, like, if you, for example, make a YouTube video and the title and thumbnail hits on the latent conditions of like how to create viral content, because OnlyFans creators struggle with creating content, then that's going to hit the latent conditions, it's going to get their attention, right? Which then you have a low commitment CTA, which is going to then make them click that video, because now they piqued their attention. Now you've got their attention, so now they're going to be watching the video, which then creates interest, because now in the video you say, go and join my free community, or go and do this, or go and do this, and in return I want your email and your phone number, wherever. You got them as a lead. Then once they've watched the video, you've got them as a lead, they're now interested. Now you just need to get the appointment booked. So whether that's where you following up with them, retargeting them, whatever it is that you do to get that appointment booked, you then book the appointment, and then you get them to show. So now you're engaging them to make sure they show up. You've got a follow-up system in place, you're retargeting them, and then they show. And then once you show, you want to get them into a prime prospect, which is where you're cooking. So this is where you're actually pitching the prospect. Then you got the serving process. And this is like just where, before you get them as a prime prospect, you want to like qualify them. You want to see if they're a good fit for your agency, right? And so like, that's what you do. And then once you figure out their prime prospect, then you try and close the deal, where you're going to have to answer some objections, and then you close them, right? And that's like the stimulus level of how it works, right? If you was to compare it to fishing, that's like how it works. And so we've got macro, which is human to client. We've got micro level, which is all the subsystems, right? And then we got the stimulus level, which makes up the micro. And again, like I said, this is where it gets fun, is the level below this, which is the each stimulus has individual variables, and this is like the genetic code of the stimulus. So it's kind of like the variable codes for the stimulus, the stimuli code for the subsystem, right? And the subsystem code for the macro acquisition system. So all of this works in like branches and nodes. So like none of this works without each other. So like if you don't have this, or you don't have this, and you just try this to this, like none of this works. Like it all works in harmony. Like this is a model, obviously. Like I said, there's more variables than this, or less, or whatever. But like this is a model, but this is how it works. And so for the baiting process, right? So the initial stimulus that would get their attention, you might have like 3 variables, and then all the way like here to subsystem 5, to get them from a show to a prime prospect, we'd have sales agenda and sales questions, and then we'd have like a couple of variables, like key variables that would determine whether or not the stimulus, so the sales questions, actually have fitness conducive to producing the conversion rate that we want. And so what you can see here is we've got variable 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 36. And we've got 36 variables in this overall client acquisition system. Now, this is a model. Like I said, there's probably going to be more or less key variables to all of these individual stimuli, but I just wanted to help you visualize this and show you that client acquisition isn't just human to client. It's not just latent conditions to attention, to prime prospect, to close deal. And it's not just the stimulus that creates it, right? It's not just the stimulus that creates it, because the stimulus also has these variables, right? And so the whole purpose of this video is to teach you how to find the variables that win. Because if you have the variables that are conducive to a stimulus on every single level and every single part of the process, if you have variables that are conducive to fitness for this stimulus, and this stimulus can produce a result that's in KPI, then, you know, all your subsystems will be in KPI, which means your macro client acquisition system will work and client acquisition will be easy for you. But the only way to make client acquisition easy is to have the combinations of the variables that produce fitness for the stimuli, that produce fitness for the subsystem, which produces fitness for the macro client acquisition system, right? And once you have all these variables across the board, then you have this, whatever it is. You have this, exponential growth, right? Where you go from 0 to 200 grand a month in 12 months. That's what's possible when you get this right? So when you see it like this, when you see the genetic code and you think, right, all I need to do is shuffle enough of these little variables and then test these individual things and hold them all together. And then once I find something that works across the board, then boom, I'm done, right? And so the good news is that you don't have to create all these variables because, well, the program has the variables ready for you to use, but it's important that you don't copy them. And we're going to talk about this more later on, but that is like the client acquisition shell, right? So one last wrap up, because I really want this to stick in your head, and I know this is like really like brain numbing. Everyone thinks client acquisition is this macro acquisition system, but again, we now know all of this stuff makes up client acquisition. So to get a human to a client, it's not just simple a human to client. To get a human to a client effectively and to win, you need all these things, right? And the most important of these is variables, right? Because again, like if the variables are shit, then this isn't going to work. And if the stimulus isn't good, then this isn't going to work. And so like it's really important to understand. And so like that's a really big thing to understand. And so one last time, just because I want this to like really stick in your head, like this is how acquisition works. And so like, for example, if your acquisition system isn't working, you're like, you know, oh, Dylan, I just can't get a fucking client. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I really just cannot seem to book appointments, for example, right? Like, oh, Dylan, cold outreach doesn't work. Like, I really like just can't seem to book any appointments. So your bottleneck you, right? So let's just say everything else is working. Well, then this is your bottleneck. And so you need to figure out, well, what is the bottleneck? Well, like, let's look at the variables that make up the stimulus, that makes up the subsystem, which makes up the client acquisition system. So like if you're bottleneck, this is how to look at it, right? Like if you're struggling with client acquisition then you need to look at this. Like, this is how you should see it. So like, let's just say you're like, right, I'm really struggling to find clients, or I'm like, I'm really struggling to find clients. And it's like, right, okay, well, if you're really struggling to find clients, then let's have a look at these levels. Let's not look at human to client, because that's where everyone looks at. Let's go deeper. And let's look at these. So let's look at the subsystem first. So subsystem 1, right, I'm really struggling to get clients. So, okay, well, are we actually hitting on the right latent conditions? Do we actually understand the latent conditions of the market? Can we actually get their attention? Well, if we're struggling to get clients, then clearly not, right? So let's look at this. So then let's look at the stimulus, right? So let's look at the stimulus, right? So, okay, if we're running ads, well, our ads, the variables that make up our ad are probably not good. So let's look at the variables and let's fix those first. So what are the 3 key variables that are going to make up that ad, right? And so if we go back here, it's like, well, the creative, the copy, the headline, the audience. Okay, cool. So let's shuffle these around. Let's like improve these. Let's change these. Let's see what we can do here. And let's try again. And so like when you do that, you're now looking at client acquisition on such a different level, because you're like, right, we've now fixed the variables, and now we've got this new stimulus, which is then feeds into subsystem 1. And now all of a sudden, you've solved the bottleneck. You've looked at your call to action. You've looked at all the variables that make up the call to action. And you're like, okay, cool. Like our ad hook's good. Like our ad hook is good. Like we're able to now hook people with the ad. And so like now you go from latent conditions to attention. So now you fix that. And if everything else is working in KPI, you might just fix this bottleneck here, and now you're good. And now all of a sudden you start getting clients. Or you could be bottlenecked in multiple different places, or all of these 4 subsystems could be working, but the show to prime prospect might not be working. So you just can't, maybe you're not targeting the right people, or maybe your sales agenda or the questions you ask are not very good, right? Or if you're bottlenecked at, you're like, Dylan, I literally can get so much attention. Like I've got a massive audience. Like I can find all these creators. I can create interest. I can book the appointments. No one's showing up to the appointments. It's like, okay, cool. Then that's the bottleneck. Let's look at this at a deeper level. Well, what are the variables that make up that show system you've got in place? Are you actually following up with people before the call? Are you sending them email reminders? Are you warming them up? Like, are you giving them testimonials and case studies? Are you calling them on the day and making sure they're good? Like all this sort of stuff that you have to look at. And those are the variables that make up this stimuli, which is like, again, like the engage and the follow-up, right? For them to book a call to show. And so like, you need to look at that. And so once you fix that bottleneck, the whole system might start working again, and then you get humans to clients. Or if you can do all of this, and for example, you just can't seem to close deals, then it's like, well, maybe your objection handling and your closing just isn't that good. So what are the variables that make that up? So like, how do we make these better and change these so this stimulus can work, right? Which then makes subsystem 6 work, which then feeds into the macro acquisition system, which makes this whole thing work, right? I know this is a lot to fucking understand. Like, it's hard to explain. It's hard to get my thoughts out and explain like how this works, because I really want to make it super clear for you guys. And like, I want you to understand it on the level I understand it on. And so like, you are probably going to need to watch this like multiple times to like really get this into your brain. Unless I've done a good job at explaining, you just get it. But like this was really difficult for me to understand at first. And it took me a long time to really understand it. But I'm telling you, if you see client acquisition like this, there's no reason for you to ever come to me ever again and be like, Dylan, I'm struggling with cold outreach. It's not working. It doesn't work for me. I'm different. It's like, well, no, just like if you see it like this, you can go and figure it out yourself. You can go and figure out what's wrong. And now I'm going to get into like how you actually do this. I'm going to show you how to find the winning variables and all of this stuff. So don't worry about that. But first I want to like show you like what our acquisition system is made up of. We got the micro, the macro, the macro, the micro, the stimulus, and the variable, right? And all of these feed into one another. Variable feeds into stimulus, stimulus feeds into micro, micro feeds into the macro, right? And so like everything here needs to be working for you to transition a human to a client at an effective level. Don't get me wrong, you can still like, maybe have a really bad subsystem 4 and subsystem 6, and you'll still sign and close clients. It's just like, it's not gonna be as efficient, right? You're gonna get bottlenecked, like your throughput isn't gonna be as good, right? It's not gonna be as good as it could be. And so like, you're not meant to like have the most perfect system. You're just meant to be within KPI, right? And so like you can improve the system over time. And like I said, once you've got a system like this that's working, and it's on KPI and the polar star's in KPI, then don't go fucking around and changing the system and changing the variables. You want to do a Petri dish experiment where you recreate the exact same client acquisition system with different variables, right? And so that way you can then test the new system to see if it outperforms the current one, and if it does, then great. You've done a Petri dish experiment, the Petri dish has worked, great, right? And so you can do that as well. But once you've got a system that's in KPI, do not fucking change it, right? Because you never know the effects of that. Like you can see how complex this thing is. Like if you got something that's in KPI and you think, oh, let's just make our YouTube thumbnails a bit better, and you go and do it, and then all of a sudden everything just goes tits up, and you're like, what the fuck, what happened? And it's like, oh, you changed the YouTube thumbnail, dick. Like you didn't need to, right? That's literally what can happen. Like there's second and third order consequences for this shit. You can see how deep it is. So that being said, let us move on. That was a lot. So let's continue with this, right? So next time you say, Dylan, outreach doesn't work, it's best to consider which variable or which variable combination isn't working. It's not something that does or doesn't work in client acquisition. It's just the combination of variables you've tried does or doesn't. Okay? Does that make sense? And so this is a very, very big point to drill home, because the people that say like cold outreach doesn't work, like people that say that are just blind, man. Like people that declare that entire platforms or systems are ineffective, in my opinion, are just fucking idiots. Like this is a really big point to drill home, right? Because like the people that say like, oh, I just can't make it work, it's really hard, like only an idiot would say that, because when they understand this, that client acquisition isn't hard, it's not difficult, it's also not straightforward, and it's also not easy, right? Like, it's literally just, do you have the correct combination of variables for every single stimulus in your subsystem chain? And if you have the correct combination of variables that produce fitness, aka are in KPI, then this thing will work, right? And so again, don't ever come to me and say, oh, Dylan, ads don't work, or oh, Dylan, cold outreach doesn't work. It's like, okay, firstly, how many outreaches have you actually done? And you're like, oh, I've only done like 400 total in the past 2 months, and I've been off and on, and I've not followed up, and I've not followed up at least 8 times. I've not really followed any system. It's like, come on, man, really think, right? Like if you're in this program and you're struggling with acquisition, then you're never, ever gonna have success with acquisition, because no one goes this deep on acquisition in any program you'll buy. And so like if you can't figure out a way to get clients, like holy shit, come on guys, like there's people in my free school community signing clients like every single day. Like you're in this program and can't sign clients, then it's a personal problem, not a business problem, right? Like this is the deepest level of client acquisition that I could ever make clear to you, right? And again, I'm going to show you how to find these winning combinations of variables. I'm not just going to tell you how this works, but I'm actually going to show you an entire process to finding winning variables, because that's all this is, and that's all client acquisition is, and that's all business is. And to be honest, you can apply this to all aspects of your life, right? And so for client acquisition, right, if you can get the right combination of variables for all of these stimuli, right, and it works, then great, right? And then if you've got a bottleneck, again, like I said, your subsystem's bottlenecked whereby you're not getting any booked appointments. You're like, I can get all these replies and I get all these leads, but I just can't get the appointments to actually book in. And if that's the bottleneck and it's not working, then what it means is that the stimuli that you're leveraging in this subsystem, right, just aren't effective. And the reason they aren't effective is because the variables that produce them aren't conducive to traits that produce fitness, aka the variables aren't good enough to be in KPI. Now, again, you're going to have to go back over this and watch it a few times and take some really heavy notes for this to really sink in, but I promise you it'll be worth it, as it's so imperative to your paradigm that you understand all of this, right? So that's me banging on about a chart for I didn't even know how long, but it's really, really important that you get out of this, and this is like the best way I can kind of explain it to you, right? We've covered the fishing analogy, the metaphor, we've covered like how this all works together, and this is what it is. Like I've drilled this into you multiple times. I know I've repeated myself multiple times, but I've done it for a reason, to really get this to sink in, right? And so that being said, When building a stimulus, ask yourself, what are the key variables, components of this stimulus? Pick 2 to 4 of the most important ones. Some stimuli can have 10 plus variables, but there are only 3 to 4 ones that really move the needle, right? So just like I said, I'm like, for a Facebook ad, obviously there's a lot more stimuli than creative, copy, headline, audience, but these are the key ones that make up the stimulus, and these are the key ones that push the needle forward for this stimulus, which makes the micro system work, which then makes the macro system work, right? And so if you can get that right on each individual level, then you're gonna have a lot of success with client acquisition. So that being said, let's get on to the next part. So traits and adaptability. Now traits, the variables of a stimulus manifest traits. There are endless traits the stimulus can have, and here are a few examples. Long, short, permission-based, clickbaity, bait and switch, transparent, humorous, serious, urgent, captivating, ironic, nonchalant, desperate, captivating, memorable, dry, mysterious, passive, aggressive, punchy, in your face, subtle, playful, original, emotional, encouraging, formal, informal, familiar, calm, fresh, friendly, relaxing, cheerful, pessimistic, upsetting, simple, complicated, alarming, offbeat, frightening, bossy, dark, commanding, weird, odd, strange, likable, shocking, too good to be true, honest, direct, indirect, boring, etc. Right? Traits are simply adjectives used to describe the nature of a stimulus. Traits are not good or bad on their own. They are only good or bad when the humans with the right latent conditions to become a client in your niche act or don't act because of them. Some niches will act on stimuli with certain specific traits that others won't. Traits can be contradictory and non-binary. What this means is that in any given niche, contradicting traits can work, e.g., for example, funny and serious, formal and informal, long and short can both work. And so, like, the easiest way to explain that is, like, this is where traits are awesome, because if you know your niche and you understand them on a really strong level, then you'll know what sort of variables to put in your stimuli and how to shuffle those variables to produce traits that work, right? And so, like I said, if you understand your niche really well, you'll be able to predict which traits they're more likely to respond to and adjust your variables accordingly. So adaptability we go next. So a stimulus with traits conducive to action means the stimulus is well adapted to the environment. So remember, the key to survival, reproduction, and scale is adaptability, right? And so if you've got like a ton of fluff in your opening DM message, let's say, then in my personal experience, an OnlyFans creator is less likely to respond. And what that means is that opening DM message, that piece of DM copy, does not have the traits adapted to the environment, which means that it's not going to produce fitness, aka it's not going to hit the metric within KPI, which means it's not going to generate you any appointments, it's not going to get you any calls, it's not going to get you anything, because it doesn't work. It hasn't got adaptability, right? And so, for example, lawyers will react differently to certain traits than gym owners. However, they are usually universal traits all business owners will react to: transparent, confident, etc. Traits are pattern-based, so traits are fractal, right? If a cold call script contains certain traits and works really well, usually you can use those traits in your ads and see a similar response. And so you want your client acquisition systems to be like a hive mind. And what I mean by that is that if you build like a brand new client acquisition system, let's just say you test a new funnel, if that funnel is really different to everything you're doing and that funnel just starts working like really well to where it's like changing your business and you can't believe it, then what you can do is look at that funnel and be like, okay, well, what are the traits of the funnel? What adjectives can I use to describe this? Or more importantly, what adjectives would the people going through the funnel use to describe it? And so like when you have a new client acquisition system working really well and you put something together like a stimulus, just out of nowhere, it just starts getting really good results. And like I said, all you need to do, you can like have a look at the traits and then you can reverse engineer the variables that make up the funnel. And then you can think, what is there about those variables that are producing those traits? And then you can introduce those variables and that genetic code into your YouTube titles, for example, and it might work. And so this is why we have like such an advantage being in such a great niche like OnlyFans, because if you go like super broad, then you'll struggle. like, this is why like generalist agencies or generalist coaches or generalist consultants struggle, because you can't adapt yourself if you're not even in an environment in the first place, or the environment you're in is just so broad. Like, it would literally be like trying to be a shark in a desert. Like, you just can't, right? And so trait effectiveness changes over time. Traits that get great results today may not in a year. This is because the psychology of your niche changes over time. So if you've got traits that are working really well now, let's just say for your stimuli, you're using like funny stuff in your ad hooks. It might work really well, right? But then if everybody starts using funny stuff for their ad hooks, they are going to start to lose their effectiveness. And then over time, traits will change. So this is like a moving thing, right? The environment is going to shift and change. And if the organisms within the environment don't change with it, then they'll die, right? And so like, that's like how traits work. And so if you understand your niche really well, you'll be able to predict which traits they're more likely to respond to and adjust your variables accordingly. Adaptability is determined by traits, but also by specific nuances in your stimuli. For example, let's say funny and simple are two traits that lead to your niche usually taking action. Just being funny and simple in your stimuli isn't enough to get an action. It makes it more likely, but you still need to carefully design your stimuli. Also, too funny or simple won't work. So, fitness and key variables. A stimulus with variables that produce traits conducive to action and with nuances conducive to action has fitness. And the fitness is not the gym, like going to the gym and your biceps. Like, it's not that, right? We know that there is not fitness. Fitness is, does this stimulus contribute to KPI? Does this copy get me a reply rate within the metric I want to see? Does this sales script close enough calls for me to be happy? Does this YouTube thumbnail get enough click-through for me to grow my channel and get more customers, right? Fitness is measured against whether or not the stimulus produces metrics in KPI and how far above KPI. Remember, fitness is not like binary, right? So for example, DM Alchemy, which is one of the systems that you're going to be getting access to on Outreach. For example, DM Alchemy, which is a cold outreach system, you're the minimum KPIs for us on DM Alchemy. Now, you don't have to potentially hit this yourself, but like, this is like our KPIs. This is a good standard of what you could get, right? So MSR, which is media scene rate, 60%. So 60% conversion rate from the first DM sent to the actual like first message seen, the media scene, because obviously with DM Alchemy, we send videos. Like 60% is the KPI that you want there, right? So if it's below KPI, then it doesn't necessarily have fitness. So it doesn't have much fitness, but depending on how low it is, because it could be, 59%, right? And if it's above and it has like 70%, then it has fitness, right? So then we got PRR, which is positive reply rate, which the KPI is 6%. So that is a 6% conversion rate from the media scene. So from the media scene to actually getting a positive reply. So not like a fuck off, right? And then we got ABR, which is the Polaris metric, is the most important thing of the subsystem. This would be like subsystem 3, for example, like 2% ABR. So average booking rate. So from the positive reply, the conversion rate from the positive reply to them actually booking a call, that's 2%, right? And these metrics each measure the effectiveness of certain stimuli. So MSR, there's going to be variables like profile, like, how optimized is your profile? Because if you've got an optimized profile, you're reaching out from an OnlyFans creators account or a really good personal brand account, for example, or a really solid like agency page, then obviously your media scene rate is going to have a higher potential of showing up. If you're verified, all these little things like that, right? So profile is the main key variable there. Like, remember, there's multiple more variables that would affect this, but like, it's about like, okay, you want to find all the variables, don't get me wrong, like you want to find all 12 variables, for example, if there's 12, you just want to find out then, okay, what are the like 3 to 4 key needle movers, the key variables that this doesn't work without. So like, for example, YouTube would be like the thumbnail, the title, the hook, and the actual video idea itself, right? Like the video execution. And so that. Then we got ABR, right? Which is, then we got PRR. So the variables would be like the video script, the video delivery, the offer, the case studies, the CTA, and then we got ABR. So then we've got all the PRR variables, so like all these, plus the follow-up process, plus the omni-channel follow-up, which is like how many touch points do you have? So like, have you hit her up on Twitter? Have you hit her up on Instagram? Have you hit her up on WhatsApp? Have you hit her up on TikTok? Just being omnipresent. And also the reply style, right? Obviously depending on how good you are at replying and, that kind of thing, follow-ups, etc. So each stimulus represents a variable, something that can be changed to improve results. So this is where you guys are a little confusing, because I said stimuli were created by variables, but you can change these things. But to change these things, you change the variables of them, if that makes sense, right? So above we can see 12 different variables here contributing to fitness of this subsystem. It's simply impossible to account for and test 12 variables at any given time. So instead, we must select the most important key variables to determine what we should focus on. Key variables are variables that move the needle and determine fitness the most. You can have boring open in DM and stay in KPI, but if you get the offer wrong, you're fucked, right? So as you can see here, we've got like the key variables, we've got the offer, the body copy, the DM script, and the video delivery. And so when I say like, okay, the key variables are variables that move the needle and determine fitness the most, you can have a boring open in DM and stay in KPI, but if you get the offer wrong, you're fucked. What that means is the offer is just as much as a stimulus as a DM opener is, right? So the offer is just as much as a stimulus as the DM opener is. But just because they both are stimulus doesn't mean they are both of equal importance. As offer is clearly way more important than a DM opener, right? So again, key variables, then we've got offer, body copy, DM script, video delivery for the DM Alchemy cold outreach system, right? So if ABR, the Polaris, the North Star, right? If ABR, if appointment booking rate is in KPI, we know a variable combination of offer, copy to script to delivery has fitness, right? So if our offer is good, our body copy is good, our DM script is good, and our video delivery is good, and then our appointment booking rate is in KPI, then we know that our variable combination of these four things have fitness. And so we've got a system that's working and great, right? Or we've got a subsystem that's working, no, the whole system, right? The subsystem's working, so great. If media scene rate is in KPI, but positive reply rate is not in KPI, we know our combination of offer to copy to script to delivery does not have fitness and requires adjustment. Because if media scene rate is in KPI, but positive reply rate isn't, it's likely that the script to delivery variables aren't conducive to fitness, as they are upstream of offer to copy, right? So if media scene rate and positive reply rate are in KPI, but appointment booking rate is not in KPI, then we can look at the variables that influence the positive reply rate to ABR in isolation. So for example, like when we are looking at, okay, well, what are the key variables of ABR? Well, it's all the PRR variables plus the follow-up plus the omni-channel follow-up plus the reply style. So we need to analyze these variables and pull them apart and figure out like, okay, well, what's wrong? Like, is the follow-up process, like maybe we don't have one, it's really suboptimal, it's not good. Is it this? Is it this? Is there a combination of all these things? Like, are we looking at the wrong key variable? Like all these different things you have to figure out, like, okay, let's isolate them and let's figure out what's going wrong and let's change them or make them better, and then we will test her again over a period of time, and then we will see if we can increase our Polaris star. We can see if we can now get our appointment booking rate in KPI, and if we do, then great, our subsystem's working, right? So once you have fitness via Polaris star metric, which in this case is appointment booking rate, because it's a cold DM system, right? Once you have fitness via Polaris star metric, you have a genotype you can scale. Note that specifically for DM Alchemy, that the above metrics and KPIs are benchmarks and guidelines. We have some clients who get a 40% media scene rate and others who scale with 1.5% appointment booking rates, right? So next we have got playing God. In nature, organisms do not have the ability to engineer their genotypes to change their traits and fitness level. They're born with a set of traits that they cannot control, and that's it, it's luck. As we know, each stimulus we create consists of a genotype, a DNA string of variables which looks like this: variable 1, variable 2, variable 3. Unlike organisms in nature, we are in control of these variables and we can actually adjust and change them to better suit the environment. we can test different iterations of DNA strings to find genotype within KPI. When we do this, we are quite literally playing God, as we're directly influencing the survivability and success of our organisms, aka stimuli, in spite of the environmental conditions set for them. In farming, this is known as artificial selection, whereby farmers select certain genes that produce desirable traits. We can do the exact same thing with our client acquisition stimuli. When building a stimulus, ask yourself, what are the key variables, components of this stimulus? Pick the 2 to 4 most important ones. Again, some stimuli can have 10 plus variables, but there are only 3 to 4 ones that really move the needle. And once you have those, you have a string of DNA that you can artificially manipulate. Over enough generations of playing God, farmers and we can create adapted species, just like you can see you with the corn graph. As corn started out like completely inedible, you could not eat it, and then all of a sudden it's transformed from this to this to this, which is pretty crazy, right? And so you can literally do the same with your client acquisition systems. You can literally artificially select and manipulate your client acquisition system by messing around with the variables until you find something that's working, until you get metrics that are in KPI, and then you're good to go, right? So in simple terms, the scientific method works like this. We have step 1, which is formulating your hypothesis, right? So the hypothesis is guessing which combined key variables are going to produce stimulus fitness, right? Then we have step 2, which is testing the hypothesis, which is combining those variables into a stimulus and expose the stimulus to a number of humans. Then we have step 3, which is observe results, aka feedback, right? So collect data and observe the effect of the variable combination. And then we have step 4, which is iterate the hypothesis. And so that's where you use the data to create a new hypothesis with a slightly different set of variables and then repeat. And this thing works for everything in client acquisition: sales, scripts, body copy, ads, funnels, YouTube thumbnail, like everything, right? And it's pretty insane. So the best client acquisition experts are just the best scientists. You can iterate your way to anything. And here's what it looks like, right? So we've got your current client acquisition state, right? Which is V1, like version 1. We've got your current client acquisition state, and then you've got your desired client acquisition state. And between these 2 points, V1 and VX, like all there is iterations over time, right? So if we scroll up, the only difference between like version 1 of your service delivery or of your client acquisition system to, you know, version 16 is like you're starting you and you're gonna eventually be you. Like this is what happens. Like it's literally it's the same thing with client acquisition. Is like your first systems like starts you, and then all of a sudden like you're up you. And it's the same with every aspect of your agency as well, right? Like your service delivery. So, you know, the first content system you build for creators to start going viral, like you're gonna start down you, and eventually over time as you iterate and you go through scientific method, like this is gonna happen. You're gonna be up you, where you just absolutely like, you know, you've got 10 jelly beans brains under management and you're just absolutely killing the game, right? And so version is the current combination of variables that you're testing. So if we scroll back down, so again, version 1 to version wherever is iterations over time. All that stands between you and your desired client acquisition state is versions of iteration. Just the same way that this program is now on its 5th iteration, right? Like the product's so much better now on its fifth iteration than on its first iteration, right? So V1 is the current version of your client acquisition system. And again, you can apply this to anything in your business, right? Any system. So V1, but obviously this is client acquisition. So V1 is the current version of your client acquisition system. And VX, wherever that number is how many versions of client acquisition systems you need to test before getting where you want to be. Now, fortunately for you, you had the intelligence to invest in this program. So you get to take our current like version fucking, I didn't even know, of like our DM alchemy and like all these different client acquisition methods that we got, like all the shiny objects, and you get to apply them to your own business. And so like you're literally, you don't have to start down here. You don't have to be the fucking like weird looking like ant eating thing, elephant, wherever the fuck this is. You can kind of start like all the way up here, right? And so that's where you have an advantage, because like my V1 was fucking terrible in comparison to what we got now. And so like you get to skip that and you literally buy my knowledge, you buy time, you literally buy time. And this is why I tell everyone, like the reason I've been able to move so quickly through life is because I also buy people's mistakes and knowledge, because I want to buy their time, because I don't want to be stuck fucking iterating. Because I mean, again, scrolling back up, like it can take fucking ages to get from this thing to a fucking African elephant. So it's like, why the fuck am I gonna go through this myself and like do that? Like I cannot be bothered. Like let me just go and buy someone else who's already done it. Like let me go and buy their knowledge so I can buy myself time, right? And you guys who've had the intelligence to invest in this program, you get to do the same thing. You get to take all our current lessons with my current insights and my current experience, which is unique to everyone else's experience, and that's where the value is, right? And so it took me about 3.5 years of testing and iteration to find VX that could get me to 500k a month. So now we are going to go over the scientific method, step 1, which is formulating your hypothesis, right? So this is where we essentially take a guess as to which variable genotype has fitness. So first, we are going to define the key variables. So ask yourself, what are the 2 to 4 key variables making up this stimulus? Once you have defined them, you can construct a hypothesis with a mix of variables. For example, the genotype of a video initial cold message would look like this: content to call to action to delivery equals the initial video, right? So these are the 3 key variables, right, that make up this stimulus of the initial video, right? The initial outreach for DM Alchemy, right? 3 variables, stimulus. And these are the 3 key variables. Again, there's more that goes into it. There's more variables than this that go into creating our initial video, like the script or the hook or the tonality, or, you know, delivery, I guess, is kind of tonality. But there's tons of different variables is my point. And we're just selecting the 3 needle movers that actually matter for us to have a good initial video, which is going to perform in KPI and have fitness, right? So we want the stimulus to have fitness. So variable 1, we've got content, which is the actual pitch of the video, right? So content is the actual pitch, like how do you pitch it, right? Variable 2 is the call to action. So what action are you asking them to take, right? Are you asking them to send a thumbs up, which is super simple, which we do in DM Alchemy, or are you asking them to send you a fucking paragraph and fill out this super complex form, right? That variable, if you did that, probably wouldn't have much fitness, right? Whereas just ask them to send a simple thumbs up was probably going to likely have more fitness. Variable 3 is delivery. Are you delivering enthusiastically and seriously? So like, how good is your on-camera presence? Like, are you actually using tonality, and are you sounding confident, and like all this sort of stuff, right? Or are you just shaking and shivering in your little boots and being like, oh, hey, I want to help you with, right? Yeah, if you're like that, then obviously you're probably not going to have fitness. You're probably not going to survive in the real world if you speak like that. But again, that's another story. So 1.2 is define the metrics and KPIs. So then once you've found the key variables, you've defined what the key variables are, you kind of taking a guess as to which variable genotypes have fitness, right? And you've defined those key variables like we've got you to make up this stimulus. Then we want to define the metrics and KPIs. So ask which primary and secondary metrics will reflect the performance of this stimulus. So primary, positive reply rate. PRR is directly attributable to the stimulus in question, so that's how we'll be measuring its effectiveness. Secondary is going to be ABR, which is the appointment booking rate, which is, you know, the video initial message will influence the overall appointment booking rate in addition to our follow-up sequence, evergreen videos, and Calendly structure. And again, this is for DM Alchemy system that we're talking about here. So if you don't know what that is yet, just, you know, stick with me. It's just a cold outreach system that we're analyzing for this, right? The one that's in the program. So if secondary, so, you know, if ABR is in KPI, then we're not going to be looking at the PRR, conversion rate, right? We're not going to be looking at the positive reply rate if the appointment booking rate is in KPI, because the ABR, the appointment booking rate, is Polaris, right? It is our North Star, it is Polaris star, which is the most important metric. So that's upstream of PRR, right? So if ABR is in fucking KPI, we're good, right? Like, we don't have to go and fuck around with anything else. We're good, right? We can do Petri dish tests and blah, 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 but we'll talk about that. Now, then primary variable, the primary metric is going to be positive reply rate, which is going to be 5%. And then the secondary metric is going to be appointment booking rate, which is 3.5%, for example, right? So that's how we define the metrics and KPIs. So next we are going to establish the sample size, right? So once we have defined our key variables, We have defined our metrics and KPIs. We're now going to establish a sample size. So this is where we're going to decide how much data you will need to know whether or not your metrics have validity to see an accurate representation of the average KPI against regression to the mean. So most people send 15 cold messages and get emotional when they get no response, and then they change everything. You cannot afford such rationality. And so an example suggested sample sizes for cold outbound organic would be, Loom video on cold DM. You're going to need at least 30 Looms viewed. This is another system that we have in the program, right? Loom videos on cold DM. Like if you have 30 Looms viewed, perfectly tracked, all follow-ups done, then, you've established a good enough sample size to know whether or not your metrics have validity, right? Because if you only have like 1 Loom viewed or 10 Looms viewed, you don't have a big enough data, you don't have a big enough sample size, you don't have enough data to actually make any good decisions. Now, obviously, if you was to have like 3,000 Looms viewed, then you could obviously have an even bigger sample size and you could move even more accurate. But like, that's not the point. We haven't got time to go and fucking get 3,000 Looms views before we iterate, right? Otherwise, it is going to be generations before we actually get any results, and we haven't got generations. So like, we have to there's obviously like a point to it, but we don't want to get, the issue is a lot of people firstly, they don't know any of this stuff and they don't track any of it in general. They don't follow the system. They don't do anything. It's just all a complete mess. They just go based off what they think they should be doing or what some gurus told them, and they don't track it in the first place, or they don't do enough of it. And so they might send like 3,000 Loom videos, and they're like, it's not working. But like, they haven't actually looked at has 30 of those 3,000 been viewed? Well, if they haven't, then you haven't actually got enough data. But obviously in that scenario, if you sent 3,000 Loom videos in cold DM and not 30 have been reviewed, then you've got a different issue, right? You've got a bottleneck in an earlier system, right? You've got a bottleneck in the actual video itself, or the profile optimization variable, right? Or any of those other variables that we talked about. Like, if that's the case, then that's where you've got an issue, right? Like, it's probably, your video script or your the platform or the follow-ups or the profile, right? So in that scenario in particular. So another example suggested type of cold outbound organic would be the video cold message in DM Alchemy is going to be 30 videos viewed, perfectly tracked, plus all the follow-ups. So when you go to DM Alchemy, if you've done it, or if you're not there yet, or if you were about to head there, the video cold message for DM Alchemy, the metric is, 30 videos viewed, and then you have a big enough sample size to make a decision of whether or not the variables are good or bad, or they're in KPI and need to be shuffled around, etc. Again, another example with cold calling decision maker pitch is going to be like 30 pitches made, perfectly tracked, plus all follow-ups. So what that means is, when you're on a sales pitch, it doesn't even have to be cold calling, but when you're on a sales pitch in general, for example, and let's just say you've got a new line of question. So let's just say you're following the line of question SOP that we give you in our program, but you iterate on it, because again, you don't want to monkey see, monkey do. You iterate on it, make it your own, and you do 15 calls with models, and they all go tits up, right? You do 15 calls with models, and you're like, oh my God, and you get emotional, and you just had to change everything because it's not working. Well, that's actually a fucking terrible idea, because that's not how numbers work, that's not how data works. And so the next 15 calls you do, you could close all 15. And so you could have a 50% close rate, but you didn't give her enough time and you didn't sample enough data. And so you need to have at least 30 pitches made with the decision maker present. So if you're on a call with a model and she's like, my boyfriend, I need to speak with my boyfriend or wherever before I can decide, you should have made sure before the call that the decision maker was present, right? So again, 30 pitches made, for example, if you're doing sales calls, right? With all the follow-ups, etc. So now we have established our key variables. We've defined our key variables. We've defined our metrics and KPIs. We've established a sample size. Now we need to establish the latency and time frame. So ask yourself how long you will run the experiment for and how much delay you will give the system to produce results. This is key, right? An example is when sending cold DMs, the test won't be fully complete until all cold follow-ups have been sent. When testing cold messages, the test won't be fully complete until a follow-up has been sent to everyone who didn't view the video. In this example, we'll give you 1 week, sending 20 messages and simple follow-ups to people that don't reply per day, Monday to Friday, then sending Friday follow-ups on Saturday, leaving Sunday for latency. So at least 30 to 100 people should watch the video, and if it takes more, so be it, right? If it takes more, just do fucking more, right? Don't be a baby. Remember, all systems have latency. Don't judge results on the final day of testing, account for delay in results. So remember I said, like, the results that you get in outreach today, for example, like the cold outreach you do today, you'll get those results like 2 to 4 weeks from now. So all the outreach you do today, you will not see those results for like 2 to 4 weeks because there's latency, right? So once we have defined our key variables, defined our metrics and KPIs, establish our sample size, and establish our latency and time frame, next we want to make the test A-tight. So ask yourself, what could go wrong during this experiment? What could influence the outcome in a biased way, and make sure it doesn't, right? For example, testing ads. If we look at ads for an example, form on the funnel doesn't redirect people to the scheduler, so it doesn't direct people to the booking link, right? Testing the email. Deliverability means you enter spam 30% of the time. Testing messages. Videos don't actually deliver 25% of the time. Testing anything. This is a broad example, right? Data isn't tracked correctly, aka human error. And this has happened to me before when I wanted to make a change and I looked at my data and I'm like, oh my God, this was like early stages. And I was like, oh my God, we're either not collecting enough of the right data on this, and we didn't have the right metrics we was looking at, and we didn't really define this, and we kind of all loosey-goosey lazy there. And like now we need to make a decision, and we actually don't have a big enough fucking sample size to figure out what a smart decision was be. So like I had to make a decision, so it relies on me then guessing and praying based on just a random like hypothesis that I can come up with, and sometimes I was right, sometimes I was wrong, and that's not how you want to base your business, right? So like this is why you need all this stuff, because you can get really fucked up. So again, now we have defined our key variables, defined our metrics and KPIs, established a sample size, establish latency and time frame. We've made the test A-tight. Now we are going to create our version X, right? So the variables. So next, create your variables. The first version of each variable you create is version 1. So variable 1, V1 content, variable 2, V1 CTA, variable 3, V1 delivery, right? And the stimulus genotype will now look like this. Content, V1, CTA V1, delivery V1 equals initial video V1. So all these variables that make up this stimulus, right? And these are all version 1 because it's the first time you've done it, right? And so the good thing is, like I said, your version 1 of this is like our version fucking X, right? Wherever that number is. And so like you have a massive, massive advantage because, again, you don't want to copy ours, but you can iterate on ours and make it even better based on hypothesis and everything we talked about and everything we're going to continue to talk about. But like your version 1 is going to be potentially better than ours, right? And that's good. And that's what you want it to be. You don't want to just copy us, right? So you're up tremendous. And now this is where the upcoming module on psychology helps, because using psychology and knowledge of human nature, we can craft better variables, right? And we've already talked about psychology and stuff, but I've got a couple more modules in this that are coming up as well. So this is where the rest of the program helps. We'll provide you with the scripts, the call to actions, the copy examples, and everything you need to construct good variables. It's imperative to your success that you don't just copy and paste our variables. You must introduce some variation and originality. If you don't, you will always struggle. If you're not willing to do this, then don't complain, because if you ask us like, oh guys, I'm doing this and it's not working, and we review your system, and you haven't built the system out, or you haven't watched these videos, that's the first thing we're going to tell you to do. Or if you're testing the same variables as us, first thing we're going to say is like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, no wonder you're not getting results. Like, I literally explicitly told that. Like, guys, I don't just say this for the fuck of it. I didn't just put all this effort into like tell you the wrong thing. Like, I'm saying it for a fucking reason, right? So now that we have done everything else, we need to establish the constants, right? So now we need to establish the constants of the experiment. So a constant is a part of the system that directly or indirectly affects the system's ability to perform, that is held constant, meaning it is not changed while the experiment is running. For example, here are the constants of the cold messaging example. Profile, the profile headline, cover photo, content style, platform, lead source, which is a big one, time of day, follow-up consistency. It's crucial to the integrity of the scientific method and your success that you do not vary constants while running an experiment, because then we don't know what variables cause what results. More on this later, right? Like, this is really important. Like, if you change the constant, so like for example in DM alchemy, like if you like build your own iteration of our DM alchemy system, and you start the system, so you start doing it, you're doing your outreaches, you're doing everything to a T, but all of a sudden you start changing your profile picture or your bio or your follow-up consistency or your lead source even, right? Like, if you start fucking around with this, oh my God, you're never gonna know like what the fuck's going on. And this is what a lot of people do, and a lot of people don't even realize it. Like, they just change stuff randomly because they think it's gonna work. I'm like, guys, do you understand like how much like shit goes into actually building a successful business? It's like you don't do this shit. Like, you can get lucky and you can, get far without like understanding this shit, but you're not going to survive long term. You're eventually going to die, and that's not good. And you're never going to know why you were successful. You're never going to know why the things worked. And like, it's so imperative that you understand this stuff. And so if you change the constants, then you're going to get fucked. And that's like a really big thing for you to understand. So again, right, wrapping this up, scientific method step 1, all we're doing here is formulating our hypothesis. So what we have done is defined our key variables. So we've defined the key variables that make up our stimulus. We have then gone and defined our metrics and KPIs. So we have gone and defined the primary and secondary metrics that will reflect performance on this stimuli of, for example, the initial video, if we're looking at DM alchemy. We have then established a sample size. So we have figured out that, okay, for DM alchemy to work, we need at least 30 of those initial outreach videos to be viewed, perfectly tracked with all the follow-ups. Okay, great. Then we've established latency and time frame. So we've now decided, okay, we're going to give her a week, sending 20 messages and simple follow-ups to people that don't reply. Then we have made the test A-tight, right? So we have looked at what could go wrong during the experiment and make sure that that doesn't happen, right? So we want to make sure that our videos get delivered, right? And then we have created our versions of the variables. So we've created our version 1s of variable 1, 2, and 3. The key variables, which has then got us stimulus genotype, which will look like, again, content version 1, call to action version 1, delivery version 1, which is our initial video stimulus version 1. And finally, we have established the constants, right? And so again, these are broad examples of this DM alchemy system, but this is for everything. This is for your traffic systems. This is for everything in your business. Like, you need to look at it this way, and you need to do scientific method. Like, this is the only reason I'm like as successful as I am. So now we are going to go on to scientific method step 2, which is testing our hypothesis, right? So we've formulated our hypothesis based on all these things, and now we are going to test it, right? So this is where we test our genotype in the environment, and we're looking at, does it produce fitness? So we are going to run the rest. So why does that say rest? We are going to run the test, take the actions to run the test. So this is where we're going to send the messages, launch the ads, wherever it is, get started, right? So then we're going to do nothing. So while running the test, just run the test. Don't start messing with the experiment, changing shit, or making any adjustments. Ignore all emotions. This is the hardest thing to do. Ignore all emotions and resist the impulse to act on any changes, no matter how tantalizingly good they may seem. Do nothing but run the honestly, guys, like, seriously, do nothing but run the test. Like, the amount of times I've made this mistake for you, please fucking listen to me. Like, the amount of times we're like, right, we implement a new sales script. Let's just use that as an example. We implement a new sales process even, right? And we are 20 calls in and we're like, what the fuck's going on? Why are we making less money? Like, this is fucking crazy. Like, especially when there's the amount of money that we make on the line, it starts to get emotional. We're like, oh my God, we fucked it. Like, why did we do this? Why did we change this? Blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, let's just change it back. Or let's just do this. But then we, like, if we do that and we act on our emotion and we act on impulse, then we could fuck it up, because guess what? We've took 20 calls. But guess what? Now those next 10 calls, it could be the best calls ever, and it could be the best thing ever. And all of a sudden, our business changes. But because we acted on emotion, because we just started freaking out, then we didn't give it a fair test and we fucked it up, right? So again, do nothing but run the test. And I know it's a long, drawn out process, but guys, this is what business is. Like, if you want to win in the long term, this is what it is. Like, this is it. So then we're going to log the data. So we've run the test, then we're going to do nothing, then we're going to log the data. Every day, log the metrics. Spend as long as you need to verify the data input in a spreadsheet. Do not make any judgments on the conversion rates until the test is done. And I know you might be thinking like, oh my God, have I really got to make like all these spreadsheets and like, what the fuck? Like, I don't want to do this. Don't worry. I know it sucks, but we're going to give you all this stuff. Like, you've already got all this stuff. Like, you're getting access to all of our shit. So, you know, you're good. Like, you don't have to go and make the sheets and this and that. But if you're building your own stuff, then yeah, you can go and make your own sheets or iterate on ours, right? So when logging data, you should always report on yesterday's results. This is because if you log your data for today at 3 p.m., 24 hours haven't elapsed and it isn't a true test. Now we need to look at scientific method step 3, which is observing our results. So again, what we've done so far, just to recap, because this is a lot, we've formulated our hypothesis, which is scientific method step 1. We have then tested that hypothesis, which is scientific method step 2, and now we are observing the results. So a test is only complete once. Data for the sample size has been collected and metrics are attributed to the source. Latency is accounted for. The test is airtight, nothing went seriously wrong. All constants remained the same. You changed nothing throughout the test. You logged the data every day with 100% accuracy and attribution. These are the rules of running a test. If you can say you followed rules 1 to 6 while completing your test, then we can move on to step 3, which is to observe results of the test. And what that looks like is the first thing we need to do is verify the data. So before we make any decisions on the data, we need to verify it again. Go back to your data sources and double check. And then we need to determine the success. So answer the following questions. What was the conversion rate for the primary and secondary metric? So like positive reply rate and appointment booking rate in the DM alchemy sense. We're also going to look at what was the KPI for the primary and secondary methods. So like 6% and 3.5%, right? Were you above or just slightly below KPI on the secondary metric? And if so, by how much? So if yes, change nothing and scale. If no, ask the next question, which is, were you above or just slightly below KPI of primary metric? And if so, by how much? If yes, change nothing about your variables for the tested stimulus and move on to the next stimulus that has a large impact on the secondary metric. If there is a strong latency downstream of the next stimulus genotype, then wait to make changes. For example, in cold messaging, you could have a 5% positive reply rate, but a 0.7% appointment booking rate after week 1. It's possible that this discrepancy is due to long latency. It takes 6 follow-ups on average to get someone who's replied positively to schedule a call, which can take 2 weeks to complete. Too much latency to add into this test, right? And so if latency, appointment booking rate, is still weak, consider what other variables need changing. For example, how you reply to positive replies, how quickly you reply to them, your follow-up sequence style. And then if no, then you ask question 5, right? Which is the primary conversion rate way below KPI? The answer is probably yes at this point. If that's the case, don't fret. This isn't the end of your business or life. You've just established a truth that gets you one step closer to your goal. Believe it or not, this is actually a good thing, right? You're not meant to be Mr. Perfect on your first time. Remember, KPIs are just broad measuring sticks for scale. They aren't hard rules. If KPI is 3.5% and you only get 2.7%, I'd consider that good enough for scale. Don't become emotionally or binarily attached to the KPI. I can't stress enough. You can scale poor metrics. A 1% ABR, so a 1% appointment booking rate, is enough to get you a call a day with 100 a day volume. So if you send 100 messages a day and your appointment booking rate is 1%, then that's enough to get you a call per day, right? That's 20 meetings a month if you're doing Monday to Friday, right? 30 meetings a month if you're doing every day. And so even at a 10% conversion rate, that's 2 clients a month, or 12 over the course of 6 months, which is enough for 100K a year, right? Or even more with this business. Like it's really uncapped, but this is a ballpark, right? And so like it depends what clients you set. There's obviously tons of variables, but this is just a ballpark figure. And so like, again, if your sales conversion rate is 25%, 50%, 100%, like then again, you're going to even have better metrics, right? So it's not the end of the world if your Polaris, your appointment booking rate is 1%, because again, volume will help you scale. Right, so now we are gonna iterate our hypothesis, right? So scientific method step 4. So now we have, again, once a little recap, just to really get us to sink in. We have formulated our hypothesis. We have then tested our hypothesis. We have then observed the results. And now we are going to iterate the hypothesis if it's time to iterate it. So once your stimulus genotype has not produced fitness, it's time to iterate. So if it has produced fitness, right, and the first iteration, because you've got access to our system, so I wouldn't be surprised if your first iteration works, right? So if you've got our cold DM alchemy system and you've made your iterations on it and it works even better than ours, then there's no reason to iterate it, right? Unless you want to do a Petri dish experiment where you duplicate the system to change variables because you think based on your hypothesis these might improve even further, but you don't want to fuck up the original system because it's in KPI and it's working. You don't want to iterate on that, so you do a Petri dish experiment where you do that, and that can work, right? But that's a different conversation. So if you've got up until this point and everything's working, right? The variables are all in KPI and everything's good, you're getting clients, everything is great, then you do not need to do this next part, right? But we're going to go through this for the case of the experiment, and so we obviously need to explain that if it hasn't worked. So once your stimulus genotype has not produced fitness, so if it hasn't produced fitness, it's time to iterate it. And so to do that, we need to redefine our key variables. So we have to go back to the original hypothesis, V1 of your stimulus, and renote the key variables. So we've re-got the key variables here. We've got content, call to action, delivery, and initial video. And so now what we need to do once we've renoted these key variables is we need to pick the needle mover variable. So what we're looking at is which variable moves the needle, aka impacts fitness the most in your stimulus genotypes. So out of the key variables, which variable do you think, if iterated positively, would have the biggest impact on fitness? Pick one. You can only pick one. If you try and change, if you're way out of KPI, for example, and your stimulus genotype has not produced fitness and you're at this point and you're depressed because you can't get any clients, and you decide that all of these suck and you need to change all of them, then you're in for a big awakening, right? Unless you get lucky, which is always a variable, but we don't want to leave our business up to luck, right? So what you can do is you need to pick one, right? Pick one of these, and the good thing is you can use your knowledge from the program and our guidance to select the variable. Also, you can ask the community if, for example, your delivery sucks, if your content's bad, if your call to action is asking for too much, for example, right? Like, you can ask the community, you can ask us, you can use your own expertise from what you learn in this program. And so let's say, for example, you establish that your delivery is great and your call to action is fine, so you pick the content variable of the video message. Well, great, the needle mover variable, and again, the needle mover variable won't always be the same variable in future tests, right? It's not always going to be the same. And so now we have redefined our key variables by going back to the original hypothesis, and we've renoted those variables. We've now picked the needle mover variable, which in this hypothetical scenario is content, because you've asked us, you've asked the community, and these two are good, but this one is not that good, so we're going to iterate on this. And so now what we're going to do is recognize new constants. So now something happens. The key variables not defined as the needle mover, for example, delivery and call to action, right, become constants. And remember, constants just mean they do not move. So with the scientific method, we only ever iterate one variable at a time. If you test two or more variables at the same time and results change, it's impossible to know which change determined the result. And that's why you can't go changing all of these at once. It's a slow and steady process, but trust me, if you go through it, it doesn't matter how long it takes. Once you crack it and you figure it out, oh my God, you're going to hit that exponential growth curve, and you can just scale the fuck out of wherever system is. Content, acquisition, it doesn't matter. Like, it's going to be insane, right? And so, like, if it takes 6 months to figure it out and you're in 6 months of pain, just fucking go through it. Don't be a baby, right? Because at those end of the 6 months, you'll hit an exponential growth curve, and you can do what we did, where you go from like 0 to fucking 200 grand in like 3 months, right? So with scientific method, just to hit this point home, with scientific method, we only ever iterate on one variable at a time. If you test two or more variables at the same time and the result changes, it's impossible to know which change determined the result. We'll discuss cause and effect shortly to help you understand. Now, once we've recognized the new constant, we are going to pick the modification level. So we're going to iterate the needle mover variable to create version 2 of it. This can be done in 3 ways. Slight modification, so the next version has lots of affinity to the existing version. Moderate modification, which is where the next version has some affinity to the existing version. Or complete modification, which is where the next version has no affinity to the existing version. And affinity just means similar to, right? So how do you know which type of modification to pick? Well, slight is pick if out to KPI but not far off. So for example, if your KPI is 3.5% and you get 2.3%, then just do slight modification. If you want to find out if you want to do moderate, then if you pick if out of KPI but not dead in the water. So for example, if the KPI you've got is 3.5%, the result's 1.3%, it's not dead in the water, but it's not great, and so you can moderately iterate. And the only time you'd ever want to do a complete modification is if the KPI is if it's out to KPI and it's totally dead in the water. So for example, if KPI is 3.5% and your result is 0.3%, then yeah, completely fucking change it, right? Because that's just terrible. So then we're going to modify the needle mover accordingly. So once you've picked now heavily, you need to modify your needle mover. So modify it. Once done, your genotype will look a bit different, consisting of the original 3 key variables, 2 of which now are constants, and V2, the needle mover. So variable 1 is now V2, right? So content delivery, I think we picked, was now, content is now V2. And then variable 2 is V1 and variable 3 is still V1, right? So if we go back to you, content now is going to be in version 2, call to action and delivery is still going to be in version 1, right? So, which means the stimulus is actually going to be in this version 2, right? So like once this, if it doesn't work again and we have to change this variable, like if we have to change the call to action variable next, then now it's going to be content V2, CTA V2, delivery V1, which is going to be initial video V3, for example, right? So, with our example, before it looks like hypothesis V1, which is content V1, CTA V1, delivery V1, initial video V1. After is going to be hypothesis V2, which is going to be content V2, CTA V1, delivery V1, and initial video V2, right? So now once we have modified our needle mover accordingly, we're going to now repeat step 1. So this is where we are going to take our new hypothesis and run it through the same test you ran V1 through. Remember to follow all 6 rules laid out at the start of step 3 before drawing conclusions. So again, 1 is going to be data for the sample size has been collected and metrics are attributed to the source. Number 2 is going to be latency is accounted for. Number 3 is the test is airtight, so nothing went seriously wrong. Number 4 is all constants remained the same. Number 5 is you changed nothing throughout the test. And number 6 is you logged data every day with 100% accuracy. So managing future experiments, right? Let's look at that. So as you run more experiments, it's important to bear in mind we want to move further towards KPI. Every test should get you one step closer to fitness. If it doesn't, you need to backtrack. And so basically, what we're trying to do here is we're asking ourselves after every single new test, were the results of this test closer to KPI? Did they have more fitness? Did this genotype produce fitness more or better than the last genotype? If yes, we know that we're going in the right direction and we can keep following it, right? And so the scientific method is kind of like trying to find a thread to pull on. And as soon as you find a combination of variables with the initial conditions that are somewhat conducive to fitness, you can start pulling on that thread and seeing where it takes you. And sometimes it'll take you to a dead end where it just stops working. But most of the time with enough iteration, it works really, really well. And it's a lot easier to run an experiment when it comes to stuff like running ads, for example, or YouTube videos or content than cold DMs, for example. So for outbound, right, like cold DMs, the scientific method is a little bit more constrained and difficult, but it's still imperative that we do it, right? And so again, after every task, ask yourself these questions. Does the latest version regress from KPI more than hypothesis Vx minus 1? If yes, go back to hypothesis Vx minus 1 and iterate in a different direction. If no, continue iterating in this direction. Does this hypothesis regress from KPI more than hypothesis Vx minus 1? If yes, go back to the hypothesis Vx minus 1 and iterate in a different direction. If no, continue iterating in this direction, right? So what we're attempting to do here is create a feedback loop between inputs and outputs, right? Feedback loop between inputs and outputs. With every test, our current hypothesis produces a new hypothesis that can feed back on itself towards iterative success. So we've got the current hypothesis that feeds back into the new hypothesis, which continues, right? Like the current hypothesis consistently just feeds into a new hypothesis, which feeds into the current hypothesis, which feeds into the new hypothesis, and just spirals and spirals and spirals. It's pretty much just iterate and iterate and iterate. That's it, right? And so, again, with every test, our current hypothesis produces a new hypothesis that can feed back on itself towards iterative success. This is the secret to client acquisition. Just lots of iteration over time. No joke or exaggeration, right? So it's just a cycle. Like I said, current hypothesis feeds into new hypothesis, which feeds into the current hypothesis, which feeds into the new hypothesis. And again, this just until you get iteration after iteration until you're on like V16, right? And so, this is not sexy. It's not a shiny object. It's not a one solution fits all. It's not any of that sort of stuff. But this is literally the secret that unlocks the secret to client acquisition. And you might look at this and be like, oh, Dylan, I can't be bothered to do any of that. Well, I'm sorry, my friend, but you're never going to get the results that you desire in business, right? Like, this is the shit that matters. So a summary of what we've just covered with the scientific method, right? So first thing we did, step one, was formulate the hypothesis. So we defined the key variables, we defined the metrics and KPI, we established the sample size, we established latency and time frame, we made the test A-type, we created the version X of the variables, we established the constants. Then, once all of this was done, we moved on to step two, which was testing the hypothesis. So that's when we run the test, did nothing, and logged the data. Then, step three, we observed the results. So we verified the data to determine success. If it was successful, great, changed nothing, we're good to go. We could do a petri dish experiment maybe, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But, if we got success, great, let's not iterate. If we was below KPI and we didn't see fitness, and our stimulus genotype didn't produce fitness, then we move on to step four, which is iterating on our hypothesis, right? So that's where we're going to redefine the key variables, pick the needle mover variable, recognize new constants, pick the modification level, modify the needle mover accordingly, and then repeat step one, right? So now you see what it takes to actually build your own client acquisition system. Next time a marketing guru tells you need an A/B split test, run for the hills, right? Or next time a marketing guru tells you that there's this secret outreach method, or there's this secret ad strategy, or there's this really cool thing that's in his white van that he's got candy in, that he's attracting you in, run, just fucking run, right? It's the same shit. So if you follow all 18 of these steps properly, you literally cannot fail. It's literally not possible. You cannot fail. And I mean literally in every sense of the fucking word. Literally, this is the Bible. Seriously, this is the fucking Bible for client acquisition systems. Please, rewatch this. Get this written down. This is the fucking Bible, right? The only variable here is time. You just need to give the scientific method enough time to work and shuffle variables to find fitness. And it can take a while, man. It can. But the good thing is, you've bought my time. So firstly, you're learning about this and you don't have to go and struggle in pain for the next 5 years. But also you are going to have our shiny objects. You are going to have our variables. You are going to have our systems. But again, do not monkey see, monkey do. You have to iterate them in your own way, or you're not going to see success. Or you might see success for a short amount of time, for a couple of months, but you're inevitably going to fail. And what's the point in that? What's the point in jumping to 50 grand a month to then be back at 10 grand a month? You kill your business because your expenses go up as you scale. And now all of a sudden you dip back to 10K a month and you're like, oh my God, I got all these expenses. What the fuck do I do? I was at 50 grand a month. I thought this was going to last. And now this is broken. Oh my God, Dylan's program doesn't work. Oh my God. Yeah, okay, bro. This is why you need to figure out and you need to realize how we come to this hypothesis, right? Which I've just shown you. So get this ingrained into your fucking brain. So now the fun, we're going to talk about petri dishes, all this sort of stuff. But first, ceteris paribus, right? It's a fancy Latin term that means all other things staying the same. It is so important to this process because we want to establish cause and effect. When you test a stimulus hypothesis, you must hold everything else in that test constant. That includes everything from the other initial variables to the controllable environmental factors. For example, let's say you're trying to test new ad copy for Facebook ads. You run the new ads, but in the process, you also add a new interest to the audience and change the headline on your funnel. Results get worse. But now you don't know if it was due to the change in the copy or the change in audience or the new funnel headline. What's worse is the change in copy could have actually got you closer to KPI, but the audience change held you back. Or the new funnel headline could have been the next best thing for you, but it didn't resonate with the new audience selected. It is impossible to make good decisions for your client acquisition systems when iterating more than one variable. This is because good decisions come from data and good data comes from the scientific method. If you iterate more than one variable, the data is fucked and not truly objectively representative of the variable you wanted to test. Start over, right? This is because our objective when running experiments is to establish cause and effect, relationships between our stimulus key variables and the fitness levels of the overall stimulus, right? So one more time, because this is really important, I want to drill this point home. It's impossible to make good decisions for your client acquisition system when iterating more than one variable at a time. This is because good decisions come from good data, and good data comes from the scientific method. If you iterate on more than one variable at a time, then the data is fucked and not truly objectively representative of the variable you wanted to test. Start over, right? This is because our objective when running experiments is to establish the cause and effect relationships between our stimulus key variables and the fitness level of the overall stimulus. So now let's look at cause and effect, right? So cause and effect. Cause and effect is when something causes something to happen. Pretty simple, right? Cause is, for example, going out in the sun, and the effect is getting sunburned. Cause is watching Netflix till 4 a.m. and the effect is being tired at work. Cause is eating steak and fruit for lunch and the effect is feeling pretty good about yourself. Cause is taking my advice on how to bake a cake. Effect, a true kitchen nightmare with Mary Berry screaming down your throat. Or in this case of client acquisition, a cause could be a stimulus genotype exposed to a human in our niche with the right latent conditions. Effect, action from a human, converting them to this next stage in our client acquisition system. The whole point of this is to establish cause and effect between stimulus and action. A stimulus is the cause and the action it elicits is an effect. If we know what stimulus causes the effect of an action, client acquisition becomes easy for us. The entire fucking universe works on cause and effect. Understanding it is intelligence. Wielding it is power, right? Understanding it is intelligence. Wielding it is power. Ceteris paribus allows us to have this intelligence and wield this power, which is pretty cool, right? So cause and effect is just when something causes something to happen. And if we can figure out like what that is in client acquisition, then it becomes easy for us, right? So common descent stimuli. At the start of this video, I explained common descent and descent modification. Common descent is a concept in evolutionary biology and it states all species of organism originated from a common ancestor. Basically, all living things from redwood trees, ants, and the weird name you have all descended from a common ancestor. Descent with modification means that parents have children, but their children will be slightly different from their parents. Every generation of offspring is slightly different from its descendants. So if we scroll all the way back up to the top, as you can see here, like the first ever whale looked like this. And over millions and millions of years and millions of generations, it iterated from this to this, which is now the current whale we have, right? Same with the elephant, went from this to this, right? And vice versa, right? The original like dog thing went from this to like a fucking wolf and a golden retriever and whatever, right? So, that being said, that's common descent, right? Just a recap, because it's been quite long since we talked about it, and that is descent and modification. So, descent and modification means the parents have children, but the children will be slightly different from their parents. Every generation of offspring is slightly different from its descendants. With thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of generations, one species can give rise to new species sharing a common ancestor. So your V1, your version 1 stimulus is the common ancestor shared by all future generations, provided the original genotype has heritable traits that indicate some level of fitness. Boom. Does that make sense? Now you understand why I was explaining all this stuff at the start. Like I just looped it around. Now it should make sense, right? And so like, that's how this works, right? Is it clicked? If it hasn't clicked, watch the video again and it'll click. And once this clicks, it's so cool to understand. Like it's really fucking cool. So your V1 stimulus is the common ancestor shared by all the future generations. So your V1 to your VX, like it's gonna be different, right? It's gonna be like the fucking, like, you know, V1, and this could be like V fucking 150, right? And so like, that's how this shit works, right? And so now you understand why I was explaining this at the start. And this is why, you know, disciplines like biology and stuff are super important to understand, because it can help you with client acquisition. Who would have known, right? So your V1 stimulus is the common ancestor shape of all future generations, provided the original genotype has heritable traits that indicate some level of fitness, right? So remember, you know, if for example, you know, you're a mouse, and or if you're a butterfly and you are blue and you're in the environment of a red plant, then you have not inherited, you don't have heritable traits that are going to be conducive to fitness. They're not going to survive because you're going to be easy to spot. You're just going to get eaten by every bird because you're a blue butterfly against a red plant, which is the environment, right? Whereas if you're a red butterfly and you have heritable traits that are adaptive for fitness, then you're going to be good, right? You're going to blend in, you're not going to get eaten. So there we go, right? Or again, if you're a fucking finch, then, and you're on an island and there's only bugs to eat and you have a really short beak and stubby beak, then you're not going to have fitness and you're going to die. And if you have a long beak, then you're going to have fitness and you're going to survive, right? So that's like V1 to V10 of finches, and it's the same way system, right? So that being said, now we can look at Darwinian stimuli, right? So natural selection is a theory proposed by Charles Darwin, right? Our boy Charles. It explains how all living organisms have evolved over generations and with time. It's a very simple idea. Organisms with traits that are better adapted to the conditions of their environment are more likely to survive and produce more offspring. Producing offspring with the same heritable characteristics that enable them to survive. Every new version of your stimulus is a new generation. Over time, with plenty of generations and iteration, it'll evolve into the most adapted version imaginable. So, right, if you've got your client acquisition system V1, let's look at your client acquisition system V1 like V1 of a finch on an island that has a short stubby beak and the only thing it can eat is bugs. And so it doesn't have fitness, and so it needs to adapt. And so, you know, nature's like, right, what happens if, like, you know, the next like offspring over generations, like we give them a long beak? That's like iterating a variable, right? Okay, so now it has a long beak and now we're actually in KPI, right? Now a client acquisition system is in KPI. Now the finch is able to eat the bugs, and now he has fitness, and so now he can survive and thrive and scale and reproduce, right? And so that's really important. So that's how it's linked, right? So then we've got random mutated variation. Variation is the key to evolutionary success. It's the random mutation of genes that has brought about humans, owls, willow trees, and all other successful species we know today. This program will give you the variables you need to succeed, but I implore you to introduce your own calculated and random variation. This is really important. I'm going to keep banging on about this because if you don't do it, then you're going to fail. There are countless combinations of variables that we can combine as DNA string to test to see if our stimulus has fitness. There is no end to variation. You can apply almost anything to client acquisition to see if it works. My best systems haven't been copied and pasted. They're results of relentless iteration of random variables. You know, on game shows like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where you get to phone a friend, when it comes to client acquisition, that friend is randomness, right? And if you ever get stuck in a corner or snookered, when it comes to building client acquisition system, just try randomness. I'm like literally not even joking, right? Turn to a random page in a random book, pick a random line and see how you can apply that to your stimuli and learn from nature, right? Now, this is exciting. I've mentioned this a couple of times. This is my favorite thing. I love doing Petri dish tests, right? So once you have a system or stimulus that has fitness, it will function properly and produce results. If you want to improve it, don't fuck with it, right? Duplicate all variables and constants and replicate the system into the same environment. Then begin the scientific process again on the replica while running the main system alongside it. Think, if a scientist found the cure for cancer and it worked over a 12-month period, they wouldn't just suddenly change all the variables, losing the integrity of the experiment to try and get it to work in 6 months. They'd run a 12-month cure and keep testing for a 6-month one, right? Imagine, you know, you find a cure for cancer and you're like, you're going to get cured guaranteed in 12 months. It's got the cure, it's great. This is the one and only cure. And then all of a sudden you're like, but I could make this better. So let me this current cure that I've got, let me start fucking around with all these variables and trying to change it. You might ruin the cure for cancer and now you have no cure, right? And so instead you keep the cure for the 12 months and you duplicate it and try and make it better. Because if it fails, you've still got the one that works. And if it succeeds, well, now you've got a cure for cancer in 6 months, right? It's really important that you do Petri dish tests. It's funny because I had a call with Stephen the other day, and Stephen understands all this stuff as well at a deep level. And it's funny because I was on a call with him and his team, and we was talking about like his content systems. And I was like, I just told him this. I was like this, and he was like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. He was like, why have I not done, like, why did I not think? He's like, I understand this shit, and yet I still didn't think to do a Petri dish test. Like, I am a fucking retard. What am I doing? I can't believe this. And it just clicked, right? And so like, even like people at high level, like you can still sometimes, if you can get emotional and change stuff, but the point is not to do that, right? And learn from our mistakes. And this is so good. Like, I love when I figured this out. Oh my God, it's so good. Right? So initial conditions. The closer your V1 genotype is to having fitness from the get-go, the better your results will be in the long term. This is because of something called the law of sensitive dependence on initial conditions, aka the butterfly effect, which we talked about. It took me 3 to 4 years of iteration to get consistent results. I was basically blind at the start. If I had better initial conditions, I could have gotten there faster. And so this is why a strong understanding of your niche will be extremely important and helpful when you start designing your stimuli. If you know what makes them tick and what's more likely to get action, you can bias your initial hypothesis in this direction and massively speed up the process of predictable client acquisition. Again, right? You are going to get there even faster because you've got way better initial conditions than me by being smart enough to buy this program and invest in yourself and buy time. So you're going to understand the niche. You're going to understand what OnlyFans creators, what the latent conditions of the OnlyFans market is, because we've done it all for you, right? And so like, you're good. You're going to have way better initial conditions. And so you can do this in the next 6 to 12 months rather than 3 to 4 years, right? Now, complex systems are extremely sensitive to initial conditions, and tiny changes in parts of a system can have a huge impact on its outcome over time and with scale. So, as above, the law of sensitive dependence on initial conditions is best explained by visualizing ships traveling across the world, right? So, let's say 2 ships set sail from Argentina, right? So, as you can see, Argentina here, 2 ships are set in sail from here, right? So, this is magnified, right? So, 2 ships set in sail from here, and let's just say that, right? So 2 ships set sail from Argentina, aiming for Australia. However, their initial direction differs by 1 degree, which isn't even 0.5% of 360 degrees. No biggie, right? Well, this tiny difference makes a big difference over enough time. In systems, it's time. It's the same thing, right? So ship 1 in this scenario, right? Just with this 0.5%, right? This 1 degree difference is going to end up docking in South Perth, whereas ship 2 is going to end up docking in West Tasmania, right? And so like if this was 2 degrees difference, well, ship 2 would end up fucking coming back to like Argentina and being in like Chile or wherever, right? And so like what I'm trying to say is time compounds tiny changes, right? And so like if your appointment booking rate is 0.5% and then test 2 is like 0.8%, you might think, oh, it's only a 0.3% different. Well, over, you know, multiple tests, it compounds, right? And this is really imperative to understand, right? Because this is really key. So that's a 2,850 kilometer difference. Google reckons about a 50-hour drive, all because of a tiny difference in the initial conditions. Another degree and ship 2 would have ended up back in South Argentina. Understanding your niche 5% better than the average business owner in your market might not seem like a big deal, but if you stick to that niche, it's a disgusting advantage to have. A small change equals a big difference when time is applied. The more time, the bigger the difference, right? Time compounds tiny changes. Now, let's look at advanced genetic ideology. So we can use advanced principles from genetics to get more clients. And so the first thing we're going to look at here is stimulus splicing. So once we have a DNA string that produces fitness, we can create iterations that are even better than the original descendant, regardless of whether they're a part of the same system. Splicing is a scientific term for genetic manipulation. It's where you take a gene variant of DNA, ideally one that produces a desirable trait than the existing strand, and then insert it into the genetic code of the organism in question. This is self-explanatory. If you have a cold message with key variables that are producing fitness well within KPI, you can take the traits from those variables and key variables themselves and splice the genes into genotypes of other stimuli in the system or other systems. An example of that is I learned early on that my niche responds well to transparency from YouTube. So I spliced that trait into a genotype of lots of stimuli in my client acquisition systems, right? And so that was really key for me. Like YouTube was actually landed some like really good clients for us early on when I like made some videos that got a ton of views on, you know, how to make 10K per month as an OnlyFans creator, and even worked really well in my niche of like coaching in this offer that you guys are in now, like when I just do super simple videos like how to start an OnlyFans management agency, right? Like the first video I ever uploaded on YouTube, like my V1, like my first ever stimuli that I put on YouTube was a YouTube video called How to Start an OnlyFans Management Agency with like a basic ass thumbnail, and it got 36,000 views, and it was my first ever video. I had 0 subscribers, and so like, you know, I got lucky, but like, you know, it might take someone 50 iterations to find this video that successful, but you know, there was also the luck element, but I also like understood the market, and I'd already had a successful agency, and so I was like, well, I already know and understand this market, and I already run an agency, so it's, yeah, I think this is interesting, let me try this, right? And so that's key. So next we've got system cross-pollination. So cross-pollination occurs in nature when one plant pollinates a plant of another variety. When this happens, the DNA of both plants combines to create a new variety of the plant. So if you have 2 different stimuli genotypes working in 2 different systems, you can effectively breed them by cross-pollinating the DNA together to produce a new, potentially more powerful variant, right? So if in your content systems you have a stimuli genotype that's working really well, and then in your client acquisition systems you have a stimuli genotype that's working really well, you can try and cross-pollinate them. You can try and effectively breed them and cross-pollinate the DNA to produce a new, potentially more powerful variant that you could use, right? So now we're nearly at the end now, so let's talk about network effect conjugation, right? So scientists that study bacteria understand a principle called conjugation. This is where bacteria in an environment are able to share DNA that has fitness with each other. Bacteria carry their DNA in a plasmid, a circular ring containing the genetic material, right? And then a donor, right? So then a donor with genotype that produces fitness can connect with the recipient, which is the bacteria lacking the genes to produce fitness, right? So they can connect. Once connected, the donor cell unravels the plasmid, transferring a portion of its genotype containing the gene that produces fitness into its recipient cell. And now the recipient now has the donor's genotype and has fitness, right? And so, no, this is a simplified model of how it actually works. But as a community of organisms in an environment, we can leverage DNA conjugation to create a network effect. So I'll say that again in a different way. As a community of businesses in the market, we can leverage DNA conjugation to create a network effect. And this is where it's going to get really good. And I really implore you to really do this, right? Because this is going to allow people to just flourish and we can take over together, right? So it's going to create a network effect. And a network effect is a phenomenon where a system gains additional value as more people use it. So if you use scientific methods to discover your own variables, stimuli, and systems, you'll find new, unique, and original combinations of variables that produce fitness across multiple stimuli. This is why it's imperative that you do not copy us and you do not monkey see, monkey do. And you actually go through these experiments and do it yourself. Because, you can find your own variables and you can find your own V10 version of your system that's 10 times better than ours, that gets better results, that allows you to overtake us, do better than us, and just have a ton of fitness, and you will have new, unique, and original variables that produce fitness across multiple stimuli. And this is really powerful. But what's more powerful than one scientist running one test is 100 scientists running 100 tests. Now you probably see where I'm getting at. And all the scientists telling each other about their results and what variable combinations are winning, right? So you can probably see where I'm getting at. Doing so will encourage other people to share their winning experiments. With enough contribution, sharing will reach critical mass, where we will have self-sustaining flow of shared experiments and winning stimuli. You might think it's within your best interest to keep your cards close to your chest, but when you share something that works, someone else will share what's working for them. That way we can all come together to share what wins. And OFM alchemy, should say, can become a hive mind, which is insanely fucking powerful. Our group, like, I want OFM alchemy to just dominate the entire OnlyFans industry. Like, this is why I'm putting so much effort into these modules. Like, I want us to fucking dominate. Like, everyone that trusts me and everyone that listens to me and everyone that's smart enough to join this program, I want every single one of you to go out there and absolutely dominate, and I want us to operate as a hive mind, because the market is fucking massive. And if there's 50 people in the program or 100 people in the program, we can all just absolutely dominate, and it doesn't matter because the market's huge. And so we can be the fucking majority of the market that just absolutely crushes the competition, and no one will be able to compete with us. No one. Because of what I'm teaching you and what we're doing. And so if we become a hive mind and we share our winning experiments with each other in the Discord, in the community, then we're going to get a point where sharing is going to reach critical mass, and we're going to have a self-sustaining flow of shared experiments on winning stimuli that we can all use and iterate on, right? Again, we're not going to copy, we're going to all iterate on it and make it better. And so it's just a self-sustaining flow, and we're going to win the game. This is how we win the game, right? This is how we literally take over the market. And so you might think it's within your best interest to keep your secrets and your shiny objects close to your chest, but that's not how you win long term, right? So I implore you to share your experiments, especially the winning ones, with the community, right? Because if we can do this, we're going to take over. And this is why you need to go through the scientific method. This is why you shouldn't just copy us, because again, you're not going to win, and you're not going to see the success you want to see. So you need, like, really, like, this is the most important module on the entire program. This is the most important video on my entire module. Go and rewatch it, go and take everything, go and literally have this as your Bible, right? And start doing scientific methods with everything, and start letting us know and letting the community know what is working, so we can help you iterate, and so we can iterate on them, and so we can come back with our experiments, and then you can see what we've worked, and you can take that and improve it, and we just become this hive mind, and we have a self-sustaining flow of shared experiments on winning stimuli. And let's do this across everything, not just client acquisition, but across content and everything else, right? And so I implore you to share your experiments, especially the winning ones, with the community. This document literally took me forever to complete, and it was fucking painful. And I hope that you can return the favor of me making this document by sharing your winning experiments with other people. Doing so allows us to birth a new epoch and accomplish our mission to make business easy. So be a donor. Thanks to Stephen from the Molossom Consulting team for this idea. It's easier, faster, and much more fun with friends. So share your experiments, right? And so the last thing, this is going to allow us to get from our current client acquisition state to our desired client acquisition state 100 times faster if we become a hive mind and we share what's working for us. So that being said, I hope you found value in this module. I will see you in the next one. Peace.